coming down Bunts to Blanco, the left.
Well, I'm not exactly detailed like
My property stretches like down. I consume like half of Barstow Road. I didn't.
No, no, what I'm saying is, back to the Barstow, you take a left. I couldn't figure out how to sit down. This long driveway. Back there.
Thank you for that. Probably my property.
Yeah, and that's why
Could be.
it is, because we were.
Used to be an old chicken poultry operation time ago.
Off the road and there's not much that like back that far on that side.
His son, who was a drug addict.
I knew it otherwise.
Escaped the police and that's.
Remember the house. I don't think it was ever.
We got another one, yeah.
My father's.
Right.
Same direction. Same direction. Trip was great.
He has Tom, I think he has Steelers. Eric.
Oh, no, I highly doubt they're even gonna, solar is a mystery to me. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
We may never build a solar farm.
He's got a team.
Soldier's one.
We cover today.
It feels like.
They cover.
Well, maybe I'm only going back like 5 years.
They were. They get paid for
There used to be a path, there used to be a path from,
They get a call.
Yeah.
Go to around.
So it's really nice. Like,
Yeah. You have the
Chicago.
the sign?
I don't have one,
It took me like half a year to feel comfortable even talking about
yeah,
it.
but somebody.
I mean, I don't know, but.
the problem was, probably the first point was some mechanical.
That- It
Yeah,
is.
that's the plan.
And I was like, no, that's. Like, this is.
Where would that even go?
Okay, so
I'm sure
are
you're.
you familiar with Greenfield Metal?
This is that proposal.
Their gravel bank off of Route 5.
Or should be fun.
Railroad track.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Then the second one, we never left the gate.
But I think.
Actually, like, so this is like Black Hill and like this.
The second one.
There,
It's down the road.
it's like right in.
But.
It's crazy.
Oh,
Sounds like a razor.
You said,
So,
so I have a guy who falls for me as a driver and he lives like, so where my field is in Black Hill, he lives down the hill. He like is a trucker and he wanted to like build a garage, like to maintain his equipment. And they were like, no.
Yeah, we have.
The first one was at 7 in the morning, no, 6 in the morning. That's right. One in the afternoon. Fourth. Long.
Right.
have at it.
No, yeah.
So we don't have anything.
People say I did go.
That's me. She's open.
Thousands.
Yeah. So we missed up, but fortunately, we had planned on going out there early.
Right.
And that was our day.
Projects down.
On the inside of the airport, most of that day.
Next month will be left with yours.
Yeah.
That doesn't ring true or square. My calendar. Well, next month is life. Get there, it's not.
I know, Bonnie.
There was an accident.
That on 12 too?
Yeah, that's the other section.
Costello built it,
Colello, yep,
Colello,
yep, he did those like, townhouses.
I saw it.
Hey.
Good, how are you doing? Good.
I know. Wait.
Contact. Traffic comes on my road.
Oh, yeah, I heard it was closing the road.
You'd rather have.
Routing.
Yeah.
Right.
So I have it on screen. Going to change, like.
It should.
Okay, because when I look at that, this says take a vehicle.
Well. Pass it quick frequently.
Yeah, that's my intersection, so I have it.
Yeah,
So I.
off 395, so.
So no.
Our which I already opened the agenda,
Okay.
I'll just scroll down to that page.
But if you get off 395, you're to the right, or?
Yeah, so on that same stretch, just had it.
Okay.
Right, or you like?
Just above you.
Trying to put in every bit.
Was it our?
So I dug like a bunch of trees on Black Hill. Like, took them to, my sales yard in Monroe.
That are used for aquaculture right now are.
I got the contract for line. Ended up buying them all down in Monroe, and then we had to ship them all the way back. It was like mile, 2 miles down the road. It's a big one.
West I think.
Like. For being a big warehouse.
Uline spends a lot of money on, I'm sure, for.
How can you?
Uline and they ship trees to Wisconsin. You landscape, your driver to work is this point in Wisconsin, you landscape from drive to work at that. We're really into landscape.
Yeah, you split it up between seed and spring.
There's more jobs.
Report every shovel.
She just got a teacher. She was a teacher.
No, it's an example.
It's like 10 years.
I know.
Really? Meet him again, yeah.
Yeah.
She just got another teaching job in Scotland.
Come back.
She's like,
No.
Thank you for the assessment.
Like commit fraud every $500. Like I'm not.
So you guys the owner.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think it doesn't always. I've been here.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Oh, there you go. I was wondering about her name.
We're all running,
Joyce today.
well, we're all here. So when they have.
Well, I really don't want to.
They can just type on. I send it to. Yeah. Where.
oh, okay, yeah.
I got a couple.
I'm gonna look up the plan that started.
We're gonna get started in just a couple more minutes here, and apologies for the delay. I know a number of us hit some traffic getting settled, but I just want to make sure everybody should have a couple of documents were distributed when they arrived. So one is the list of recommendations that we'll be reviewing today that was generated from conversations and votes that we've had in previous meetings. The Farm Bureau put out a PA 490 farmland assessment proposal that we have printed off, and I walked it around to people who were here when I came down, but if you don't have one, there's some on the end here. We also have a data collection form that John put together that he passed around when he got here, which it may not have come to you if you sat down after it got started, but let's make sure that you have a copy of that. I think that is everything that's been distributed this morning.
We don't see the data collection.
John, do you have more of the data collection docs?
Yeah.
We'll run off some additional copies here.
Oh, I don't have one.
Amy's going to run off some more copies and make them available as well. And John, if you could email it to both Martin and me, we'll make sure that we distribute it on the website and to everybody who's dialing in virtually today.
Thank you.
I did not get them. Thank you very much.
Just understand.
And then I want to acknowledge we have Bonnie, Nick, and John, members of the working group dialing in. Keith Bishop, if you will recall, at our last meeting said he'd be traveling and was going to do his best to travel to dial in, but not sure that he was going to able to manage that based on the technology on the plane. So thank you all for making time. to dial in from your various places, whether it be in the state or if you're traveling. I know, Bonnie, you're at a conference, so appreciate you pulling away from conference to participate in this. No, I think it's okay, so people can see who's, as long, Bonnie and John, is the auto tracking annoying watching the camera go from place to place, or is it beneficial to see who's speaking?
I'm okay because I know who's speaking, but auto tracking works.
I agree. It's fine. Yeah.
Great. All right.
Is there a way to make sure that our online guests have access to the documents that were received this morning?
They were all emailed.
Okay, this one I don't remember seeing, but
Yeah, it was put on the meeting agenda packet, 'cause it got sent line in the end, so. The one that was the Farm Bureau.
I have a point of clarification. Is it really the Farm Bureau or is it Larson, Bishop?
Well, it's
It came from Paul, so
Okay.
I guess I should not represent it as the Farm Bureau.
Thank you.
Paul wears multiple hats, so
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the problem. When someone sends something late, we can't get it out to everybody and get it posted, on our website or anything, timely. So apologies for that, but it will get posted as part of the minutes today. Or the meeting notes after this. All right,
I think we're ready.
you're recording?
When I started it was
Okay.
recording.
Nope, thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. June 23rd, 9:15 a.m. Apologies for obviously the late start due to a lot of traffic tie-ups this morning, including myself, so apologies. Want to welcome everybody. We'll go through, we'll run around the room and just identify who's here. Then we'll go online as well for any members that have joined us here. So Martin Heft, OPM Undersecretary.
Ryan Hurlbert, Commissioner of Agriculture.
Connor Banowski, representing CNLA.
Jenny Kipsikevich, Stonehill Farm Field and American Farmland Trust.
Mark Walter, the town of Columbia, town administrator.
Paul Larson, Connecticut Farm Bureau.
John Hall, Westbrook First Selectman at Maple Breeze Farm.
Dave Beers, Connecticut State Forestry.
Chris Martin, Director, Connecticut State Forestry.
Ben Freund, Friends Farm Inc.
John Emanuel, 490 owner and Rocky Hill Town Council member.
Brandon Whalen, farm owner, Hayes Farm, Rocky Hill, and also town council member, Rocky Hill.
Mike Gilman, Shellfish Farmer, Connecticut Sea Grant and Yukon Extension.
McKinnon, New Connecticut Farmer Alliance.
Joe Orifice, Hidden Blossom Farm, Union, Connecticut, and Forester with Yaleport.
The city of Norwich assessor.
Perfect. And I know Bonnie.
Hi, good morning, Bonnie Burr, and I'm with Yukon Extension.
Nicholas.
Hi, Nick D'Addario, Selectman in Easton, Connecticut.
John.
Morning, John Casertano's Greenhouses and Farms, representing Connecticut greenhouse growers.
I think I've got all the members online. Did I miss anyone? I think that's everybody. Okay. With that, so today's agenda is a review of the yes recommendations that we went through at the last meeting. We'll review each of the 9 recommendations individually. That was what was discussed at the last meeting that we would do. And for, as we look at developing each of those more fully, we wanted to have more time to be able to take each one individually and discuss them. Additionally, the group will discuss improvements on the current process, which is one of the recommendations as well. On there, as we try to finalize a final package of our recommendations. So we do have in the one handout, which is the spreadsheet, which is the 9 recommendations that was discussed and sent out. has the category, the recommendation, little bit of the background, and then the action, whether or not it's internal or would require legislative action, just so that way everyone has the same listing on that. The last meeting, we also talked about us starting with, the valuation pieces before we get into the reporting and classification, because obviously having understanding of where we are going with the valuation could lead to how we're going to be handling those other pieces. So that was asked for us to do it in that order as well. Additionally, as was mentioned, that you also have kind of a summary document here that prepared by Bishop Larson and Freud, which takes these recommendations and kind of just summarizes it there. So you have that document. I apologize, those online, if you don't have it. Those that are members, it is in the share drive and attached to today's meeting invite. But we'll get it posted along with the notes from today as well for that. So the process, we'll do is we'll start at the bottom of this list of the spreadsheet and then kind of move up the listing as we go through today. But before I do that, Commissioner?
No, we got a lot of work to do. We're already running late, so let's dig in.
I don't know how.
Just again, for record, identify yourself for obviously people online, and I want to appreciate that.
Sure. Paul Larson. I just noticed looking over the minutes of the last meeting, and just a little technical correction. Under next meeting, it says that this meeting will be held virtual on June 23rd in person. So you just delete the word virtual.
Yeah, we'll just make a note of that. And these are just notes. They're not official minutes.
Okay. I didn't know how.
So, I'll thank you for that. I will. What happens when you use copy and paste and this thing? Yeah. I just see that there as you mentioned it. It's like, yep, stands right out to me now. Appreciate that. Thanks. Okay. So then, what we'll do is the first one on the bottom is maintaining current practice with enhanced, improved reporting processes, outline improved survey processes. This obviously would be internal. Can you go all the way down to I think it's the very last page of that. And, there you go. Thank you. That's okay. So it's ID number 23. We're gonna start, obviously bottom and up. So this is talking about, the recommendation that we said we'd move forward with, to look at further is maintaining the current practice, what we have now, but ways that we can enhance and improve on the reporting process. So that's where we're at for the first item, of discussion. And again, just as, we go through discussion here, kind of the plan is we have 9 things, on here. If we want to try to, just rough time frame, about 15 minutes on each one. Some may take a little longer, some may take a little less, but just kind of at an average so we can try to, work our 3 hours that we have today for our meeting. Obviously, if we need more time, then obviously we'll continue, with that, but that's kind of just a ballpark, to get us going and kind of just keep us on a time frame so we can, get through all of these today. For that. So we'll open it up for discussion on this one about maintaining current practice, with enhanced improvement reporting processes. So would anyone like to start? Or
Paul, do you want to, some of that is reflected in yours.
No, it's a lot of it is. Yeah. Paul Larson, Connecticut Farm Bureau. A few of us got together and just went over, had some discussion time and looked at, basically, thinking along the lines that this program has served farmers and landowners well for decades, and really we're not looking at making major overhauls to the structure of it or how it works. But obviously the problems we ran into last year was the reporting process and then the calculation of that data that was submitted. So some of the things that we're just putting out there for discussion. Obviously, this is a starting point, and wanted just to get something going. But couple of the key points here would be a declaration, so a reporting process where landowners in the 490 program would file a statement every year with their assessor. It would be separate from the any other M28s or any other forms, and that would give updated data of rental values, including zero values, and hopefully give the state more accurate and timely information. The other points in here, we're consolidating the categories, getting down to 5 or even 4 classifications. We spent a little time talking about that, and how many do we really need? And that those classifications would be owner certified, with a process where the local assessor would be able to challenge that, if you will, or dig into that a little deeper and make sure that those classifications are accurately reflect the quality and use of the land. And then ultimately, the goal would be to have a predictable, consistent process here that would give both municipalities and the landowners some assurance that there's not going to be major changes. The towns know what their tax income looks like. The property owners know what their tax liability would be, and that it would be give everybody some more assurance and consistency in that regard. As this group has discussed, we also felt strongly that the forest land valuation is a very different animal, and the current system seems to be working, so there didn't seem to be any need to, visit that and try to come up with something new there. So those are kind of the highlights of what we were thinking to put out there to begin the discussion, really.
Thanks, Paul. Joe?
Joe Orefche. I'm glad to see keeping the existing forest land process, but I just want to make it really clear. There's no management plan required now.
Okay, can we just 1 second? That's the next recommendation of the forest. Could we keep them separate?
Yeah.
I have a note on that too, but thank you, Joe. Don't want to cut you off.
That's fine. That's good. That's a really important
one. I want to keep each one separate, although that's part of current process. We have a separate recommendation just for forests. So
I'll say I like the reducing the number of categories. I think that's really good. I do wonder about the declaration, if assessors would use that for kicking people out of the program if they don't declare. Sometimes it's easy to not get the notification that you needed to declare, or not remember because it's been 5 years or so. So I think that's worth discussing how that would happen.
And just to remember, so as we're talking about current practice, we're talking about the current survey practice that we do now and everything else. The separate reporting pieces are other. That's under reporting as we get farther up on the list. Forest is separate up farther on the list. So let's try to keep each separate to what specifically are here. We're talking about current practice as it is now, what ways we can enhance them. Yes, they all tie. I understand they tie together, so it's a little difficult, but we're going to talk about some of those more in depth a little bit later. So just don't want to spend too much time hitting those that we're going to hit separately a little bit later.
On the current practice, while I got the time, I think it's really important that we think about how the data were analyzed, because the problem wasn't just lack of data being reported. It was poor analysis, and it was blocking of people from reporting who didn't pay rent. And so I like seeing the zeros in there. If we're going to go with that process, I think that's really important that those need to get factored in. And if that's a problem with mathematical formulas, you can put 0.0001 instead of a 0. But I do think that's really key. And then I also think we have to, if we're going to go with the current process, we have to figure out how to deal with parcels that have different land classifications being rented. It shouldn't be parcel reporting. It should be by classification. So swampland doesn't get grouped with cropland because somebody's renting a 20-acre parcel that has half swamp, half crop, but they're paying for the whole thing. Also, we should think about what type of farming is getting reported, because I fear that people who are renting land for just paddocking horses could be renting that at a much higher rate than what a productive farmer would be doing, and that could skew some numbers. So just some of the details of that I think would be worth discussing if we go that route.
That was someone else. John?
John Emanuel. Just for clarification, Paul, you had said annual declaration, but note here you have 5 years.
Yeah, we thought of a 5-year cycle. I mean, that could be shortened if the group feels it'd be more appropriate, but.
No, I was, I think your review, you had said annual declaration.
I'm sorry, when I talked about it?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that then.
Okay.
It'd be a 5-year. And that would be, the assessor in each town on the 5-year cycle for the whole state, will everybody be the same? Because there's gonna, a lot of landowners will have property in different towns, farmers will have multiple towns involved. That way it's consistent that way. And we would, just like what Joe said, you'd have, I've got 100 acres and 30 of it is category A. Again, we're reducing those number of categories. So that would be like what we now term tillable A perhaps. And 25 acres is swamp and ledge. And so, you'd break it down by category, like Joe suggested. And then that would be a self-certification by the farmer. But if there's any question to that, the assessor, according to the whole thing the structure that we would put together, would have recourse and the ability to say, I'd like you to get an NRCS assessment on that, or look at soils maps or whatever, and come up with something that they can all agree on as far as a fair partitioning of the land into different categories.
Ella?
McKinnon, so everything that you guys are saying makes sense, but I'm also sort of running into the problem of the reality of the way that people were reporting things. Obviously, tillable A or prime, or however you want to think about it, and swampland shouldn't have the same value, and a paddock or a farm building shouldn't have the same value as pasture land. But the way people are renting reports, even though I'm sure they know very well what different parts of their soils are, they're not reporting rents that way, right? So how do we jive the fact that different parts of the land have different values with the fact that people just go, here's the lump sum rent that I'm charging, right? I don't know how you kind of square that whole.
Yeah, I mean, to try to answer that, I mean, because we also wrestled with that. In a mixed, and most parcels would fall in that category where you'd have multiple plan classification types, for the most part. Would have to have some kind of standard to, some kind of base value might need to be established, and then go from there, whether that's greater or less than what the base value is or something. I don't know, but we talked about that for quite a while, and believe me, we couldn't come up with a concise, we nailed it, this is the answer. I think that's going to be the role of this group to try to figure that out. But we know that is a stumbling block of how to actually come up with a figure for the different classifications.
Jenny Kipsikevich, I just wanted to make a statement about how there's a lot that's converging here. We're talking about land use, land value, and then we're also talking about the actual assessors. And I am, I'm from the conversation I'm hearing in here, every town clearly is kind of managing this a little bit differently. So when I pull my personal tax card on the land I actually own, not the land I also lease, the land I actually own, it is already being taxed at different rates because of how I applied for the program, right? So on my tax card, I do see it in different land categories. So am I hearing it correctly that some of you might, let's just say 100 acres, you have 100 acres that's in and it's being assessed at the same value, even though the land itself might be broken differently?
I'm specifically saying that when people report their rent values, they're not dividing it by land classification.
Okay.
So it might get then turned around, right? Because everyone knows, maybe every assessor. I don't know how I don't know how 169 towns work, but let's say a town breaks it up, right? Then they're using the OPM values to break it up, but those OPM values are based on land's values getting smushed together and therefore getting kind of sloppy in their values, which is how swampland got to have such high value, right? So that's the data in gets messy, which means the assessed values get messy even if they're parsed out.
But we also, I just want to make a statement to acknowledge that the assessors actually, like when I've been with my assessor a lot over this journey and has no idea what she's even looking at, right? So like, and she's a phenomenal assessor. I don't want anyone in this room to think that my assessor is not great. She's great. But she's admitting she has no idea, even if she went out to do like a spot check on tillable A or tillable D, she doesn't know what that is, right? Like, hence the self-reporting part, right? Which there's also going to be a lot of, variation there too. But I just wanted to say that I think unfortunately our assessors are at a disadvantage with whatever this group determines. They're still not necessarily as educated as they should be.
Just since we have two assessors in the room that might be able to help clarify your piece, I want to call either on David or Bill if you have any comments on that piece there. Obviously we know, in assessment world, an agreement. The assessor is one who has to make the determination, of either the land class or whether it's excess land versus buildable lot. All of that type of stuff does fall, within the assessor, piece there. And, Damon sits as, co-chair of the PA 490 committee for the assessors group. So I don't know if either of you want to add anything into that. And then Joe, I'll get it to you. Or not. I don't want to call you out.
So David Brush. So one of the things that I'm looking at or considering, when we get an application, oftentimes we're looking for a map. What is your use of that property? What is the certain segments on that? So I think that information is extraordinarily helpful because then you can isolate, well, this is non-productive, this is swamp, woodland, whatever the case may be. This area here is where I pasture, this area over here is where I have tillable, and so on and so forth. One of the things that has been confusing is the differences between tillable A, tillable B, tillable C. That's something that we've all tried to address. Those are supposed to be categorized based on soil type. But apparently a lot of assessors don't necessarily know that. And I've known towns where they've had contesting from the farmers who think, I'm not tillable A, I'm tillable C, because that rate's $400 cheaper. And they don't really argue over it. It's all about dollars and cents. So I think if we can move it more towards the land classification being similar to soil type, we all now have soil maps. Those are readily available throughout the state, even within your own municipality. So I think if you can get a property map, shows this area here, line that up with your soil maps. It's tillable A, you can pull it off the soil type as opposed to describing it as such. And that goes over to the self-reporting, because again, if you think it's going to impact your taxes, the likelihood is that you're not going to report fully. It's just the nature of the beast.
Use them. Joe and then Fran. Go first.
Fran Whalen, I just want to agree with Joe and Ella that it's the reporting end of it, not the assessors. The assessors are going to use what the state tells us are the rates for these different classifications. Like we rent land, some of it's swamp and some of it's a hay field, and we're just paying the taxes on it. So we're not breaking it down like what these guys are saying, so much for the swamp land, so much for the hay part. It's a flat rate, or we rent land for $1 for 10 acres. Some of it's woodland, some of it's cropland. So that's what the problem is. And I agree with these guys up here that how are we going to determine to set these rates when the landowner is just receiving a flat $100? Here you go for 10 acres or whatever. They're not breaking it down as individual classifications. So that's a problem that I see also.
So I think with that, and just thinking about how this works, one, the soils maps are available, so you could go on and see what's tillable A, what's tillable B if somebody wanted to challenge it. But I agree, it's hard. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have I mean, I have fields where you have tillable C and then tillable D, and they like mix and and it's just crazy because of slope and the rest.
Right.
So I really like simplifying those because statewide importance is something that is clear. Prime soils are clear. They're based on a soil type. They're already determined by the USDA. And most towns have a GIS system where they can toggle those layers. I know like the Northeast, NECOG or whatever, Northeast Connecticut GIS, a lot of towns use that where I am. And I'm sure I know other towns. New Hartford had the same option. You can toggle farmland soils. And when you do that, it's not coming up tillable A, tillable B. It's coming up statewide importance, prime, sometimes local importance for some towns. And so those are some ways to do it. But to the point about rental values, if we do this categorization, a lot of the rental values are going to blend. So someone's going to say, look, it's half prime, it's half 48% statewide, and it's 2% something else, and I get $100 for it a year. And so they're just going to say it's 100, whatever acres, 100 acres, it's $1 per acre per year for all of that. And I think that you can work some of that out if it's swamp or it's forest land, if you have a good questionnaire that's been tested. So like the actual survey document, the questionnaire should be tested. And this one from UConn, as far as I know, wasn't tested. And so they weren't able to actually get clear data because they didn't see if those data could come together. And I think you could have a questionnaire to the landowners in 490 that asks these questions. Do you rent your land? Yes. You rent all of the land? No, only the hayfield. And so therefore, what portion of your hayfield is statewide? What portion is whatever? And you have a map when you apply. So I think some of that could be worked out if we wanted to go that route. But I think we'd still see blending of the prices. So yeah, anyway, those are some of my thoughts on.
Okay, let's try to take a step back in the only sense that part of our process here today is to come up with, the recommendation is, what is our recommendation? What are we going to be doing with this? And we're talking about, which is great. We're talking about some of what the issues are and everything else, but where are the solutions? Where are the thoughts? Where are the out of the box thinking of how are we going to make, if we're going to continue with the survey process? Joe, you had a couple of good things, maybe a couple of additional questions here, but people aren't filling out the survey. How do we get them to fill out the survey? How did the group get, the petition that was signed to the governor? How did they get all those people to sign online? It's like, is there some methodology we can use to help do that? These are the things that we need to look at, to move. If we're going to stay with the current process, how are we going to make this better to get people to do the survey if we're going to use the survey process? Yes, we can make enhancements to the survey itself. That's part of it. But the other big part is, we already know people aren't filling out the survey. So how do we do that? I
think one solution to that too is make the survey simpler. So you can have a survey for forest landowners. That was probably nice information. I'd be interested to hear from you on what they thought about that part of it. But you could also have some of these categories be flat rate. Why are we surveying people about what their swamp rentals are? Right? Let's just make swamp flat rate. It's been nearly flat rate for the whole time of PA 490, between 0 and 40. Now, and then 800 or whatever it came. So some of it could be flat rate. And you can just take that out of the survey, which also helps your response rate. Anyway.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Damon. So again, I think to improve the process, I think the mapping would be helpful. If you wanted to actually have the map provided to the surveyor that has a soil map and say, show me on this map where your farm is, or what you're planting in this area, or, you can isolate swampland, you can isolate those different areas so that if they do report that it's simply $100, you could say, well, geez, half that land is swamp, so that's not derived from that portion. It's got to be at least from this. The swamp is going to be contributory in some way because the applicant is always going to include as much land as they can. They're not going to say that the swampland is not farmland. They're not going to say that the woodland is not farmland. They're always going to include as much as possible. And then we have to segment that into different categories. So the mapping, I think, would be helpful with the application process, because then there's a clear diagram. You could, again, isolate it to soil type and or use based on that individual farmer. The other thing I wanted to ask about is the encouragement to fill out the paperwork and submit it. Has anybody discussed penalty or provision for that? that says a fine of assessment increase or dollar amount or something along those lines, because if it's just purely optional, you're not going to get the same kind of return.
You want to respond to that, Paul?
Yeah, we talked about that, and we talked, that in
I
that.
apologize because I did come in a little
Yeah,
late.
Paul Larson, when that form is sent out through the assessor's office in each town on those 5-year intervals, there would be a notice in there that, failure to return this form by whatever the date is, can result in a 25% increase in your taxes or something. Make it so they have to do it. So the landowner that's benefiting from the 490 program that's one of your responsibilities by get this benefit is to file the paperwork. Ben, you have something to add to that?
Ben Troy. So the simplicity of this would be to qualify for 490, you have to submit this paperwork. To qualify for all the other tax breaks, you have to submit paperwork. If you don't submit it, the penalty is you don't get 490. It's not an aggressive penalty. You just simply go to the way it would be assessed if it was not under.
So currently the law says is that the only way that I can remove a classification is under 2 circumstances, period. And that's a change of ownership or change of use. Not that you didn't file the paperwork. So you would have to file or make legislative changes. And that's the same thing even if you wanted to apply a penalty. There's no provisions for failure to file right now. So you would have to add legislatively some language that says penalty provision. And that could be an assessment increase, it could be a fine, it could be whatever the case may be. That should be something that we can discuss. And there are different levels of penalties that we currently use, like personal property, you fail to file, that's 25%. Real estate, if you don't file an income and expense on a rental property, it's 10%. 10% of a $20 million apartment complex is a significant penalty. But if it's 10% on a $1,200 farm assessment, you know what I mean? So there's how much teeth are you going to have and what do you want to do as far as that's concerned? I do think there should be a penalty, but you also have to incorporate, that's going to be new law. That's got to change the law.
And that is one of the recommendations farther up on the list, it's reporting, and we said we do that. Kim?
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this or suggested this a couple of times. I know Keith had put this in that presentation as well. But the idea, and I know Jenny, you and I spoke about the fact that it's fairly easy for the assessor. We have to go in there and put in our personal property information every year, whether you're going in there to add, or you've bought a new piece of equipment that you need to include, or you're just simply signing same as last year. You have to do that every year regardless. And so including this to me every year, making the form simple, but including it every year also allows us to see what has happened over 5 years, what's changed. And I would like to sort of say, beyond leasing, what are those data points that we're looking at? Of course, farming or PA 490 is not just farmland, it's preservation land, it's forest land, aqua farm. So there's a sort of a suite of different things that this encompasses, but the input, the strain and the challenges for farming comes down to inputs and what, quite frankly, farmers can afford to keep that farmland in use. Again, this goes back to what was discussed over and over again. You can't preserve the farmland without preserving the farmer. And so in order to do that and make that land viable, I think we have to look at, too, what are those data points that are shifting or changing or maybe remaining flat, like utilities, fuel, all of these input costs going up and down, or mostly recently up, that impact farmers' ability to maintain and stay on that land and keep it farming. Or forest land. Forest land isn't just sitting on it. It's weeding out invasives, taking down standing dead timber. So forest land and preservation land, for that matter, does require a cash management cost. And so what are those impacts? We just did 15 acres, the start of creating silvopasture on our property. And our forester, our logger was in there and said years ago, we would get about $2,000 a load of timber we're taking out. This year, we got about 500 and some of it is zero. You know, that's a big impact. So now that same silvopasture to create is going to cost farmers to create versus having it done as a net zero, but because there's value to it in logging. So it's looking at what are those input costs beyond soil types, because the soil types really don't seem to relate to what your output margins ultimately end up being.
Jenny Kipsikevich, I'm not quite sure what part of the list we're on, so I apologize if I'm out of order, but I certainly remember when we were talking about today, we wanted to talk about the things that we wanted to be able to really dive a little bit deeper. And I continue from day one, have said that the law is good. The survey and the questions that got asked and how the survey got distributed was where it felt like it went sideways for me. And so to your point about making sure that we're making a list of recommendations, I think that to Joe, we do need to look at the questions that get asked, how they get asked, and that they all get asked, right? Because we shouldn't be kicking any survey out because a respondent chose a response one way or the other. The other thing about being proactive is how do we get the survey distributed properly, right? And so we know that this is about the use of the land and it's per the landowner. And so Damien may be able to speak more in depth to this, but when I was speaking to our tax collector about ways that we could potentially get this out to landowners, she reported to me that more than 130 towns, so obviously not all of them are using this, but they're using the QDS system in terms of like getting their tax bills out. She said for a very nominal cost, they can add that if you are a PA 490 landowner, that an additional mailer could be sent in the same envelope. So I'm thinking about like, how are our ways, you know, yes, we need to think about building a list of agricultural operations, but at the same time, this isn't always about the agricultural operation. It's about the landowner and how that land is. So I'm just trying to think like, how can we do a better job about notifying about a survey? This might be one avenue, maybe not every time, but while we're building the system and understanding it better, it sounded like a very simple lift. Now, I'm not a tax assessor and I'm not the tax collector, but it sounds like that could be a way that does not put a huge financial burden on municipalities, but gets it to the right people. Not everybody needs to have it, just the PA 490 landowner. So just a couple thoughts about where we should head.
Thank you. Damon?
I just want to follow up. So I do think that annual is beneficial, even if the data isn't used annually, because it gets the applicant in the habit. What we commonly find is if we send paperwork for the first time in 5 years, nobody knows what it is. Nobody's ever seen the form before. Nobody understands why you're asking this information. If you do it every single year, it's a simple form and you're used to doing it, it comes in a lot easier and you can get better data out of it as well. Because that way, as we have penalty provisions and these people come in and they get incorrect or poor filings, it affects them and things do get better as that goes on. So I think that's possible. And we can isolate classified land based on our state codes so that we can identify, I mean, every assessor's office should be able to easily identify property that is classified. Just hit the button. So we can isolate and identify those. You could put it on a barcode scanner on the bill if you want to do that. You know, so load onto the website, fill out this information. That would save us a lot of money as far as postage. So there's lots of options there.
Bonnie, and then we're going to wrap this one up to try to move on. We can obviously come back to some stuff because we spent a little over a half hour on this one already so far. Bonnie?
Thanks, Martin. I think one of the things that I've been hearing over and over and over again is we need to keep it simple. We need to refine the questions that are being asked. Jenny, and again, for our tax assessors, I'm really intrigued by the fact that something can go out in the mailer. I think that's a no-brainer, Jenny. So thanks for bringing that forward. I think the other thing that we need to remember is that for a number of farmers, I can tell you when we milk cows, my dad would have to make sure that he went to the landowners that we rented from and said, hey, 490 is coming up. We just have to watch that. So I think that if we are working with, across the board, there's any number of the trade associations can get word out to their producers that they need to make sure they touch base with their landowner so that they're watching out for this information to come down. So that's just some thoughts listening to this particular topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. We've got some suggestions in there. We'll kind of get those together afterwards so we can come back. And some of this will, as we know, is already overlapping as we get into some of these other ones that certain pieces will, come up here again. Next piece here in kind of a two-part, if you will, that was brought up was to maintain the forest land valuation as existing by deed based upon the regional stumpage valuations. There was a second part requiring a forest management plan. There was some discussion at the last meeting, about this forest management plan. Forest management plan, I apologize, that would require a legislative piece on there. So just so you know, it's not noted on this spreadsheet because I realized that afterwards. The first part would be internal because we keep the current process as is. No change that has to be made. We're using the stumpage reports, which is the major, piece of all that. And we're fortunate. I don't want to speak on behalf of Deep, but I know that, we had a period of time where it wasn't being generated, the stumpage report. Now it back is again. So that's helpful. So we'll have that data and everything else there for that. So in essence, should be no change in any methodology or the data sources for that. But then more of the discussion would be is, if we're going to require a forest management plan, that's going to require a legislative action. And is that something we want to move forward with or take that piece off of this kind of, from some of the discussions we had at the last meeting? So I don't know if we want to have, if Deep Forest side wants to start off there, then we'll go to Joe.
Yeah, I think certainly open to this concept, but I think it's beyond the scope of our charge here. And if we were to go down to create, and I would be a proponent of creating an additional type of forest land classification. We've bantered this thought around before, and the term stewardship forest classification has come up in the past, somehow recognizing the fact that the landowner has gone above and beyond the initial enrollment, but is actively engaged and concerned about their forest health. Therefore, they're doing some interventions with professional qualified foresters. That would then incentivize yet a lower tax bracket for them. And I would, if we were to go down that path, if this group wanted us to do that, I'd be glad to charge that. I would propose a separate working group, though, come up with a legislative proposal that we could either be an agency proposal, or if there was a champion in the General Assembly that wanted to carry it forward, we would certainly get behind that.
Chris, just for everybody's awareness, and I don't know the answer to it, but do you have any idea about what percentage of forest land is in what you would consider a stewardship or an active managed forest?
I don't have numbers off the top of my head. I will say, though, that given the most recent federal investment in forest land, and I'm thinking NRCS, EQIP, and we've gotten some fairly large Infrastructure Job Act funds. There has been definitely more forest landowners engaged in actively improving their forest land. So the trend is upward. I think historically it's been very low. Probably 15-20% at the most. But I do think we're gaining out. Dave, do you have any thoughts on that? Dave's a service forester for.
So with the landowners I work with, I'd say 95% of them only do a forest stewardship plan. If they're getting some sort of cost share funding or grants. It's pretty rare for a landowner to pay out completely out of pocket. So it all depends on how much federal money we're getting. that determines how many landowners are doing forest stewardship plans.
Before we open this up for a wide range of conversation, I just want to, given the time that we have left and what we have to go through, it seems like there is general consensus around maintain forest land valuations as existing. If there wants to do any sort of different forest valuations that DEEP has offered, to get together a conversation around that. So is there anybody who disagrees that the current practices should maintain or should be modified?
Well, I'll just comment, Paul Larson, that we did talk about, reducing the categories, but there also was discussion about in the forest category, perhaps having two forest categories, one of a stewardship kind of managed, more intensely managed forest that would have maybe zero value because you really want to encourage that. So, you're waiving taxes on that or something. And then another value for just your basic unmanaged but standing timber forest. So that was just another perspective on it.
I'll make mention too, it really hasn't come up in conversation, but within the farmland list of classifications, there is a woodland classification, and there is no, so forest land classifications has a fairly extensive list of regulations that are attached to it. Qualified forest reports, certain minimum stocking levels. The woodland classification for farmland is similar. Well, maybe not similar, but it is like, it because you see it. It's wooded. There is no minimum acreage size. There's no required qualified foresters report. And I think you can maybe speak to this. Generally, it's accepted that if you have ancillary woodland associated with your farmland unit, the assessor is just to tax that at the current PA 490 forest land assessment value. No other documentation or study or inventory is required. So that really hasn't come up in conversation much. I don't know if folks have any comments or concerns with the way that current operates.
I'll Damon Brush, I'll comment real quick. I do agree that I think that it would be an ideal situation to have a forest land classification as opposed to the woodland as part of a farm unit classification. The woodland as part of a farm unit, I've seen applications that have been gone through the Department of Ag where they've got 100 acres of land, they're farming 20 acres, and they have 80 acres of woodland, which is part of a farm unit. Being classified as forest, it's classified as farmland. I don't agree with that. I think that you're going to classify forest as forest, especially if you have sufficient acreage for it. And I do think that a rate is better there. I've seen, say 2020, 2019, there was a horrible gypsy moth pandemic that just wiped out a ton of trees. I still go by woodland and I see dead trees abundantly throughout that. And I just think to myself, well, these guys just never went in there to clean out the dead brush and trees, and that's just going to cause issues from here on out. I do think woodland management is a valid thing to pursue. I don't know if it's part of this, but I do encourage that.
Go ahead. Just to tail on to that. So we have encountered situations where an assessor calls us and says, I got a farmland here, over half of it's wooded, but they want to do it off farmland. We have advised assessors that no, if the majority of the property is forested and they have some farmland, that needs to be a separate classification. Forest land, you're going to hire a qualified forester. If it's 5 acres here, 6 acres here, something under the 10 acre per parcel or under 25 acres, that has generally been enrolled into the woodland classification without any additional work. But if it meets the forest land criteria, then it should be classified as forest land under PA 490, not woodland.
No, I agree with that 100%. If it meets the forest land category, they should have to go through that process of the qualified forester's report. I was going to say on the management plan requirement, is it good forestry? Are they managing well? Leaving standing trees may not be the worst thing. Actually, it may be hazardous to people, but environmentally, probably doesn't hurt. So I've managed a few thousand acres in Vermont. In the state of Vermont, they have current use that requires you not only to have a management plan, for that plan to get certified by a county forester, and that you follow that management plan and give a report every 10 years. It is terrible to deal with. Because if you get a county forester who doesn't like the type of management you're doing, they can stop you from doing that. So if you wanted to manage for white pine instead of balsam fir, or balsam fir instead of white pine, you can actually get forced by the state to do that, which is, it's really challenging. So I'm not a proponent of that. And I also, as someone who teaches forestry and all the rest, management plans don't necessarily mean good management. People don't often follow them. Management and forestry could happen once every 30 years or once every 50 years and be really good and be really bad. And so I think there's other venues we might look at for that other than PA 490. The point I want to make, so I'm a fan of keeping the current system for this. And I will make one point though. I know that FIA data was used by DEEP to analyze this. I would, and I'm not sure how you did this, so I'm not criticizing, but it would be nice if the FIA data could be parceled out just for private land, because typically Connecticut state forests have much higher stocking and higher standing timber volume than private lands, which have changed hands. And when they change hands, that's often when you lose. That's when you get bad management, is when somebody liquidates and it changes hands. So if it's possible in the process, it would be nice if the FIA data were only private land FIA forests as opposed to, it's probably minuscule, so it may not matter that much.
Jenny Kipsikevich, I just have a question. I recognize that this is kind of like outside our scope, but it is on our list. So I want to just ask for a point of clarification. I don't care if it's Joe or the DEP who answers it for me. The current system requires what in the plan format? And a forest management plan, can it be done outside of NRCS's control?
Joe, Rich, the current, and I'm a qualified forester to put land in the PA 490, so I do this now and then. The current system requires the landowner to hire a qualified forester, qualified by DEEP, and there's a list. And that forester goes and conducts an inventory, determines if there's enough trees to actually qualify it as forest land and enough acreage within, the requirements to qualify it as forest land. Then they provide a qualified forester's report, which is a few pages. It's not extensive. It gives a few management recommendations by stand type, so by section of the forest. And then the forester gives that to the landowner. The landowner submits that to the assessor, and they get into the process of 490. So it's it doesn't require any management. And then the second part of your question, yeah, anybody, you hire a forester, they'll write you a management plan. You just might have to pay for it, and that could be, depending on the size of your property and the extensiveness of the plan, that could be anywhere from like $3,000 to $12,000. So it's a bigger lift to have a management plan, and a lot of those sit on the shelf for people. Our students will write management plans at Yale for private landowners in the northeast corner, and some people use them. They're great. They're great for giving people information and caring about their forest and understanding what's going on. Why are those trees dead? But they don't necessarily always lead to the actions in the plan. And that's okay, because if you're planning what to do in 10 years, a lot can change in 10 years.
Thanks, Joe.
Damon Brosh. I just wanted to say that I think that management portion is somewhat important. I think that forest land classification is kind of the easiest possible 490 discount that you can get. It's absolutely simple. All you have to do is be fortunate enough to have 25 acres of forest. Call the forester, he says, yep, it's forest, sure enough, and there you go. And you don't have to do anything to the wood, to the land, to anything. You just reap benefits for having forest. If there is a management that has to take part of that, that kind of supports the discount a little bit more. We're giving you the benefit of a reduced assessment because you are investing in the land and you are managing it and you are maintaining it. I think that makes more sense. That's why you farmers get the discount, because you work so hard. It's not easy. Forest land is easy.
But I think you could argue with forest land that it has the highest environmental services value. So if you think about all these towns, all these rural towns with forest land, all these people with wells, right? All that water is being filtered through that forest land. timber is great. And I'm a huge proponent of management, by the way. I've written publicly about why Connecticut needs to manage its forests. So I'm all for management, but I think it's really challenging to force people to do it. I don't think you always get the results that you get. And I think if we think about all the values of forest land, there's so many more values to the state of Connecticut of forest land than timber. Timber is also important. And when you get into invasive species management and all of the rest, that can be so expensive that somebody would probably just sell their forest versus doing it. In Vermont, what happens with this, because the state of Vermont requires invasive species management on their current use forests, what typically happens is companies will come in and they will say, oh, you have to take care of these invasives, or you have to follow every 10 years, you have to do some sort of management on this parcel. So what they do is we'll take care of your invasives, but you're also going to cut this timber. And so they cut the timber and that money goes to the invasives and the landowner gets nothing. And that to me is a disincentive for forest land as forest land. And they don't necessarily solve the invasives problem. They just sort of like knock it down.
I think we think something should be done, but again, this is kind of a secondary tier. This is a whole different kind of discussion about it. So I agree wholeheartedly. But I don't know that that's in this realm.
I mean, I don't know if PA 490 is the way to do it, but I'd love to see state programs from deep, like we have agricultural grants for farmers to improve, to reclaim pasture. I'd love to see grants from the state for forest landowners to do, superior stewardship. But I don't know if taxing is the way to do that. We're already so low on this.
Let's move on from this because we've already agreed that, we're going to keep this the same in that deep as offered to do, look at the forest management plan as a separate type, piece there. So we can kind of close out that one there. Did you have something on?
Yeah, I just want to just have clarification. That separate piece is not related specifically to PA 490 as much as it is getting maybe an exemption. Because to me, it's a slippery slope. If we do it for forests, we have to do it for farmland, right? Where you're getting sort of quasi exemptions through PA 490 that say pasture. I'm getting an additional rate or lower rate because I don't just have preserved pasture land, I'm using it to raise livestock. Do you see what I'm saying? Having forest, keeping forest, and the incentive, I think, to keep forest inexpensive. The reality is, as Joe has pointed out, as I've personally experienced, it's expensive to really maintain that forest land, to take out the invasives without giving up several white oaks or something, because that's the trade-off with, otherwise you're dishing out a lot of money to get those invasives out. So I think it's important to keep this sort of idea of reductions or exemptions separate from PA 490. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Bonnie?
So Martin, I guess I have a point of clarification, I guess. Do you need a motion so that if we find that we can agree on something, that a motion can be made and then it can be voted on and taken off as complete? Or do you want to do this all at once?
Up to the work group of whatever you feel people feel comfortable with. If you want to do that, that's perfectly fine.
I'm just wondering, again, I'm hearing that people are pretty satisfied. There may be some things that might need to tweak here or there, beyond what we do. But I'm just wondering if there's enough agreement in the room to put a motion to this, that forestry remain the same, and then we can just take that off and move on with agricultural land and aquaculture.
Want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I will make a motion that it remain the same, and that if everyone is in compliance, in agreement, then we can vote and move forward with the other two types of 490.
Letken seconds.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion that we maintain the forest land valuation as existing. Is there any other discussion?
So long as it doesn't say requiring a forest management plan, because that's
exactly
not
what I just stated. Is the motion was to maintain forest land valuation as existing. not adding in the forest management plan, anything else. It's just keeping the current system. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, terrific.
We did something.
Only 8 more to go.
Momentum.
Okay, the next one is implement an annual growth cap. Looking at the long-term average producer price index from the Bureau of Labor Statistics as a cap, not a fixed increase. This would be a legislative recommendation if it's something that we wanted to, move forward with and discuss. So I'll open up that piece there of implementing an annual growth cap for discussion and input on thoughts, discussion on that piece. Joe.
Joe Ravitch, just a question on that. Is that going to be an expectation, or is that going to be a cap? Meaning, will people look at that and say, well, we can grow 2.6 every year, so we're going to grow at 2.6? Or is it that, rental values drop and things can drop, or rental values stay the same and things can stay the same?
So, Paul, do you want to?
Yeah, Paul Larson. Our thoughts with put this together, but again, this is just coming from us. Was that would be a cap, not a recommended annual increase or anything like that. Follow the data, see what it says. But if there's a year where it's in excess of say 2.6 or 2% or whatever we want to choose, then it's capped at that.
I like that.
And if it's only 1%, it's 1%, whatever.
Damon Lanella?
Just a quick question. So we're talking about a variation here between 5-year valuation cycle and an annual growth cap. Over that 5 years at 2.6% per year. Is that what we're talking about?
The way it's written here, it just says a 2.6 for every time it's adjusted, which would mean every 5 years, but that's up to this group.
That was just an example. These were the recommendations that were submitted by you as members. So that was just the example that was put in there, the 2.6. So I don't
Every
know.
5 years.
Well, you have two different things. On Paul and Friends, their document, it's based on the previous 5 years. On the Excel sort of recommendations, it says annual. So I think that's worth figuring out which one we're talking about. I like the 5-year.
5-year assessment process. Yeah. Yes.
Do I hear a motion for 2.6 over 5 years?
Second.
I need to know who made motions.
Brian.
You seconded it? Oh, thank you. So the motion was to implement an annual growth cap over 5 years, 2.6%. Correct?
Clarification. Not an annual growth cap, a growth cap.
Oh, sorry.
Implementing the
Growth cap over
previous
5
assessment.
years,
Yeah.
2.5%. Sorry, I'm reading my thing.
No, it's okay, yeah.
Scratch. That's why we're recording this, so I can get. Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. Discussion, Mark.
Mark Walter. I get the 5-year assessment. You're just trying to avoid what just happened, huge increase. But every year, the mill rate gets modified in the annual budget. Is that modification tied into this, where if the town went up like this year, 3 mills, it wasn't during a 5-year reassessment, would the land be capped at 2.6 for this example?
In our document, we're talking about on the reval, on 5-year cycle, because it currently happens, cap on that evaluation would be 2.6%. Nothing to do with the mill rate.
No, okay, so it's not mill rate, it's just valuation of the land during a 5-year cycle. Okay.
Ella, then John.
This sounds fantastic to farmers. Does this seem fair to assessors?
Yes.
Yes. All right, end of discussion.
Billy, assessors, we don't care. At the end of the day, it's about valuing what is in a town in the state, is it fair to the rest of the population is the question.
Sure, yeah.
Right? Because at the end of the day, what we do, we say that what we're doing is fair and equitable. So for the other 42,000 residents in the city of Norwich that aren't farming their land is a 2.6% over 5 years. So if we have one classification that's $1,000 per acre, it can only grow by $2.60 over a 5-year period, that acre. So you multiply that by 50 years, that's 10 periods. So you're saying that $1,000 per acre value 50 years from now isn't going to be more than 1,050 per acre 50 years from now. While some residents, city of Norwich, and probably everybody here, some of the residential properties from 2018 to 2023, when I did my reevaluation, saw their residents go up 60%. So are we saying here that it's fair to only go up 2%, $50 per acre over the next 50 years potentially, while another single family can see their property double in 5 years? I think that needs to be the question that we ask.
Kim?
Well, I think the difference there, Bill, is that your farmland, everything associated with farmland is going up. And so your input costs are going up exponentially, not pacing at the same rate as your margins. And that's what we're looking at now in Connecticut and nationwide, is that the cost of farming. So it's really a existential question. Do we want farms or not? Because as if we keep looking at how much can we pull out of that farmland while all of those other costs are continuing to escalate, you know, it's a little different than, and I get, and you know, we're facing this problem with housing as well. But so I get what you're saying, but at the same token, if you look at 50 years ago, some of these rates were pretty flat, were held pretty flat until 2020, where they started to climb. And so, and there was a reason for that, right? Because the costs of farming were way outpacing the margins for that commodity that's grown or raised on that same land. And again, I'm only talking about farmland. You know, forest land is its own entity, and certainly preservation land is also its own entity. But I think it's important to know and to be able to have something that's a little flatter, one thing that's remaining flat and affordable, so that we can actually farm that land.
I know, John?
Yeah, John Emanuel. I just want to play devil's advocate for a moment. If it's capped at 2.6%, and to Bill's point, if it's a negligible increase, I think we need to go back to the earlier discussion about, is it going to be a mandatory reporting or is it going to be voluntary? Because what would the incentive be for me to fill out the survey if I know that it's only going to go up, you know, $25 for my property tax? So I think we need to think about that. What's the incentive for me to fill it out if I know it's just going to be negligible anyway if I don't fill it out?
Ben?
I think on the 490 question and the fairness, I think that you have to go back to how 490 protects that land for the town itself and the value it takes to the town in keeping farmland versus other types of development on that land. And I think that there have been quite a few studies that Farm Bureau has conducted that says that there's great value to the town, to the tax base, in the amount of services required by somebody that has land in 490 versus somebody, say somebody that has children that are going to a school. You know, cows don't go to school with field adage. So you have to consider that.
Joe, Damon, I don't know, do you have your hand up, Damon?
Sure.
Sorry, and then Joe.
Brush. So I think one of the things that the whole point of the beginning of this was that you're looking at using an income approach to look at the value and determine those rates. If the farm rates go up, it's because the market has said that it's worth more. If you have a situation where your costs have skyrocketed and you're barely making ends meet, then the market value goes down. There isn't a giant increase as a result of that. Your value goes down because your costs have gone up. It's an expense to income kind of ratio. So if you ignore all that and just say 2.6%, I think you're missing the point entirely. Again, I had brought this up before where a town does a revaluation. The town value goes up 20%, but the mill rate then drops by 20%. So there's an offset. And again, if you floor one item there, when that rates go back and forth, it creates a bit of an inequity, which again, we're talking fair and equitable. We want things to be on the same level for everybody. And my impression was that was going to be based on the income valuation of the property, not just a flat cap of whatever it is. And running the numbers, obviously 2.6, I don't think effectively works. It kind of stagnates things, and then you'll find yourself in a situation where you need to fix that. And as a result of that fix, the rates will change dramatically. What I mean? If it gets so far behind the 8 ball. So I think, keep it consistent. You want to try not to do too much rigmarole. If the values are up because the market is up, that means the farmers are doing better. They're able to pay more for the rental of the land and they're able to produce better. If the values go down, it's the exact opposite. So I think there's,
I'm sensitive to the point you guys are making about this handicapping any increases into perpetuity, at the 2.5%. And I think the intent of this, right, is so we don't get these crazy fluctuations. So what if instead of every 5-year cap of 2.5%, we have more of a catch, where if the prices increase more than 10%, they stay the same as the previous assessment until things get figured out as to what's going on. Like you could have it be where it's not that it's always capped at 2.5%. It's that if for some reason there's some major jump in the percentage of these farmland values, we do essentially what the governor emergency did this year, is hold the previous rounds, the previous 5 years numbers. And I think you could do something like that without some sort of permanent cap, because the percentage increases we saw this year, they weren't 2.5%, they weren't 10%, they were 200%, 400%, 100%. They were huge. And so I think you could have some sort of buffer on this without having it be sort of a constant.
You could do a phase in of the values if that was a significant.
What?
A phase in of the values. Like there are towns that do a phase in of the revaluation values so that it's not a giant one increase, it's 10% each year for the next 4 years or something like that. So you could phase those values in. That's just a suggestion.
Remember that these all need to be legislative proposals. So we're not drafting the legislation here, on it. So, I mean, obviously we're trying to put forth, either any recommendations, and then some of it's going to have to get worked out depending upon some of those details. And obviously we want to know those, and we don't have to have the exact, language of, legislation here. But we've got to present a concept. And I think that's where we're trying to get to is, okay, this 5-year growth plan, if that's what we're working on, as a recommendation, and saying, okay, it's at 2.6%, it might be, should there be some, other type of indices, that we have to use with it and everything else, that can be part of the development of the legislation itself too. So I just don't want us to get too hung up on, too much intricacies.
It wasn't a cap. It wasn't a cap if it was a buffer. If it was to say we went through the 5-year reassessment process with questionnaires, surveys, and it came back that swampland jumped 200%, whatever. And it was more of a check to say, okay, when the reassessment process goes through and one category jumps over 10% or over 100% or over whatever, then the reassessment team needs to go back and reanalyze that. I don't think that would be legislative. I think that would be part of the analysis process to say, hey, something might have gone wrong here.
go and recheck. Are there enough data? Is there an error with the data and the analysis? Ella, then Bonnie?
Ella, I'm just wondering, because the methodology isn't legislated in the first place, why couldn't a cap or a guardrail or a buffer or whatever just be part of the methodology? Why would that need to be legislated? I just want to understand.
Because you're putting a limit on something. We don't have anything, you're putting a limit on what we can do. So that's why it's a legislative, action, because you're stymieing, you're saying, okay, we can't exceed this piece here. And right now, that's a legislative cap, same as like a spending cap. The state has spending caps that's legislatively directed that they can't exceed certain things. So that's why it's a legislative piece.
Thank you.
No problem. Bonnie?
So Bonnie Bird, Joe, if you're offering a friendly amendment to the 2.6% to do some sort of a catch and review, I would certainly second your motion, Joe, so that we could move this particular motion along.
I guess I can make that motion. I don't know how strongly I feel about it, but I would make it. I'd like to hear more thoughts on it.
No, point of order, there's already a motion on the floor.
Right.
So the motion that's already out there for 2.6 either has to be defeated and then another motion made or something along those lines. So.
Or we could discuss, I would be interested in a little bit more discussion on whether we tried to do a cap type of thing, or whether we had just some sort of mechanistic buffer that if during the reassessment process every 5 years, that during that process, if for some reason a category jumps over 50% in value or 20% in value, that the reassessment team go back or convene farmers or do something to figure that out.
So what a recommendation where that recommendation would be, let's vote on what the motion is. I think the second part of that could be more of a policy, versus a legislative, piece that, could just be a sub recommendation, to say, okay, if it hits this trigger, that, data gets looked at again, type of a thing because of that scale and whatever that number might be, as a suggestion. Only because that wasn't one of the original recommendations here either. So I'm trying to keep it to what the recommendations were.
Joe, it falls under the bottom one because it does say, and I'm sorry, we're in a motion.
Oh, it's okay.
It does say maintain current practice with enhanced improved
Right.
reporting process. So that can
Right. So we could pull that, and which is a good spot. Yeah. To say that's a way to improve the current system is to put this buffer type thing in. So we could, plug that down into the first piece there. That's a good thought. Thank you, Jenny.
Isn't the law already written to account for that? Like it takes it back to the commissioner's office to say, you have to do this final evaluation to sort of see if these numbers are right. So I'm not sure what we're adding to this.
The statute only says that we have to provide values. It's a single line statute.
Okay.
It's not detailed out.
So we have to go
process or
back
anything
legislatively then and add an amendment to.
It's a single line statute that's basically says that, every 5 years, Office of Policy and Management in consultation with the Department of Agriculture have to provide PA 490 values. It's a single line. That's what the statute reads.
Right.
But does it go through?
There's a lot built. There's a lot built.
Process and everything else. We have a standard process, which is here's our policy, the way we do it, and everything, which has been since day one. This has been the thing, but it's not legislatively directed that way. But once you start either adding caps or say you want a mill rate cap, everything else, then it becomes legislative that you've got to change. You either put that methodology into statute.
Well, yes, but as I'm
that way it has to
understanding,
be done that way.
we're taking out the 2.6 and putting in essentially like.
I think we need to vote on the cap and then.
Correct. The 2.6 cap is what the motion is here. The other recommendation was about looking at a buffer type thing, talking about putting that just back down into current practice. The first recommendation that we discussed, saying that could be part of the policy, is that if a category hits this level as an improvement to current process. So keeping them completely separate.
Martin, I'm going to call the question so we can vote on the 2.6.
Okay, but we've got to do, thank you. Okay, so the motion right now is to recommend implementation of a 5-year growth cap of 2.6%. Okay, that's what our motion is on the floor. And the question's been called, so no more discussion. All those in favor of that recommendation signify by saying aye.
Aye.
There might be no votes on it.
Okay, well, raise your hand if you're saying aye. Aye enough so we can at least see. And no, raise your hand. Oh. So you got 9. You got Bonnie as a Bonnie. Was you raised your? That was a no, Bonnie.
Correct.
This is Nick. I was a yes.
We got 17 votes.
Yes. 17. How many people?
Did someone abstain?
Anyway,
Yeah, anybody abstain?
No.
Yeah, let's do. So all those in favor, hands up high so we can
get a count.
We can get a count.
I
think you were a yes, right?
Yes, yes. I just don't have camera access and I don't know how to raise my.
All those opposed to 2.6, raise your hand.
So it's 9-8, which means it's approved by 1 vote. So it's a recommendation. Okay. And then we're going to talk about the
buffer concept.
The buffer concept. We're going to move to the first piece that we talked about, a current practice, and put it in there as a note.
Can we just not jump to making a motion so early? We have our discussion first, maybe, then somebody make a motion? No?
Procedure would say make a motion.
We did discuss, we did this, the motion was made, and we continued discussion, and then the question was called, which means it ends the discussion.
But I mean, the motion was already made. What I'm thinking, there was a lot of discussion where maybe the buffer could have been put into the motion and then all voted as a one. I think my take is we jumped to making a motion, then we had discussion. We have some of that.
That is the proper process of a meeting, is you make a motion and then you discuss it. And then you vote on that motion. That is the Robert's Rules of Order.
We didn't do that. Why didn't we do that on the first one, right off the bat?
The first one, no one made a motion. No one made any motions on the first one.
Can we talk about a buffer? Do you need a motion for that? I mean, I think the conversation about a buffer could influence the vote we just took, depending on how we did it. I would be interested, I voted no on that because I would be interested in talking about a different mechanism that's non-legislative for dealing with the same intent. I like the intent of what we just voted on. I didn't like the details of it.
Can I move we adopt Robert's rules?
Yes. There's a motion to adopt Robert's Rules, which we have been utilizing. So
not really, because we've been having just general discussion. But I think we should adopt Robert's Rules. So we have a motion, we have discussion, we have a decision.
That's fine. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the motion to adopt Robert's Rules of Order. For those that aren't aware, the standard parliamentary procedures are standard for most.
I get Robert's rules for bringing votes. I think it's important, but I think there's so many details in this that could really stifle discussion and just have us be bringing motions and then talking about them and then voting on them like we just did, which may not be as comfortable to everybody, but we had a one-person majority, and so now we have a recommendation that nearly half of the people don't agree with. I mean, Robert's rules are great, but I'm not sure, and I like the efficiency of Robert's rules, but I think they're more functional when we're close to making decisions than.
We're 6 months into it.
I know, but we're in the details of it, you know, and there's a lot of options, so.
I will say, you know, just like at the legislature, town council, or other, you know, parliamentary body, right? You make a recommendation, have a second, you have a motion and a second, and then the motion can be amended. So the reason why this was amended is the motion was for a hard cap at 2.6%. Conversation was around a softer buffer. That's not really in alignment with what the underlying motion was. But to Ben's point, to move things along, we are supposed to be making decisions today, you know, and so we, you know, got about an hour and a half left of the time we were set aside for this. So to move the conversation along, it does create some action and spur a little bit about, do we like this or do we not? Is this something we want to, you know, recommend moving forward, whether it be, you know, through a legislative path or through a policy path? We need to start getting to those conclusions.
I agree, but we got to be thoughtful on what motions we're making, I guess. You guys are making the motions, so. Oh, no, I know, but we got to be really specific now that if we're going to follow these rules, we got to be really specific about how those motions are made. Yeah.
You know, this discussion is about a motion on the table for Robert's rules, but to your point, Commissioner, I brought this up last month, and, you know, I think it was Ben who said something on there. We're finally getting to the meat and potatoes of actually talking about the problem. And now I feel like I'm being rushed. I really do. I feel like we have finally said, let's talk about this survey. And now we're going to like smash it into the last day. And I did say this at the last meeting that I felt like, wow, we've kind of like driven this bus and we have a motion on the floor. So I suppose we should vote on it. But we were also told that if we needed more time, we could have more time. And I feel like we are really talking about what we're supposed to be talking about, to make thoughtful recommendations to our governor and to you so that you can do this job differently the next time. And I feel like we're.
Well, I'm going to state that Commissioner and I are here as facilitators only. We are not voting on any of this. You know, in essence, you know, we're not the stake at the table here. It's, you are the members here. Your members are making the motions, not us. On here, beginning of the meeting, I stated that if we need additional time from today, if we're not able to get through all this, we'll continue on. You know, for that, it is your meeting, it is your working group. So no one from the administration is pigeonholing anybody.
But the conversation was about the 2.6.
If you feel that the administration is doing that, because we are certainly not. We have given ample time and made adjustments to what this committee or this working group wants, and have adjusted accordingly. And
I would hope that Robert's rules would be used to focus discussion, not to stifle it. My, you know, history of going to meetings, I've only found it as a way to be organized, not as a way to tell anybody to be quiet. Everyone has an opportunity to state their things. There's multiple ways to vary the conversation within a particular motion, adding amendments, calling. There's so many things to do. And at this point, I think we've had great presentations about what went wrong. I think that we've had, you know, great discussion around the table, and it's time to focus the discussion on some decisions as we can make them. If the people don't want to make a decision, that can be a motion as well to go a different way. So I support the motion on the floor to go to Robert's rules to guide the rest of our discussion.
Bonnie?
I'm in alignment with Mr. Freund. I think that Robert's Rules of Order offers an excellent way to proceed, and I would agree with Ben that if there's decisions that can be made, then let's get voted on them. If there's decisions that need to have more conversation, then you have the conversation. But I think that this allows us to continue to move forward with the issues that we have clarity on versus, you know, not just continuing to talk about it. So I think that if Robert's Rules of Order, it will help us to move this process in an orderly fashion, then I would like to see I'll be voting yes on this motion.
Ella?
Ella Kennan, sorry, I'm trying to think of how to, I don't want to point fingers or call anyone out, but I think that people are having feels right now. One, because we're fatigued, because it is 6 months into the process, right? We're tired. But also, I feel like in the last thing, there was an active discussion going and there was new information being brought in and then the question was called. And I think that's what's making some people feel like, wow, this is more abrupt than it needed to be. And so I love calling the question when like 5 people are repeating the same point over and over. That's fantastic. Let's get on with it. But when new information is being brought in, that's going to feel stifling to some people. So I think that's what happened, and which might not have bearing on whether or not, but just reflecting on, I think, what just the dynamic that I'm feeling right now.
Thank you. Other discussion? Bonnie?
Sure. No, Ella, I appreciate your comment regarding calling the question. I thought that, again, for me, I heard repetitive conversation around the 2.6. And when I thought Joe brought out an excellent question, and again, to call the question, you can either take the people who propose the amendment can either take it off the floor, and that allows the discussion to start to move on, or you can call the question, vote, and then you can move on that way. So again, it's very procedural, and I'm sorry that I've made people uncomfortable by calling a question that I thought had been discussed, to an extent which we did or did not agree on the 2.6. And again, this opens up for the process to now talk about how do we move forward with doing the process of being allowed to address that number when it appears to be excessive. So I don't want to make people uncomfortable and call the question on Robert's Rules of Order, but let's get the motion off the table and move on.
Nick, I know you came on off mute. I didn't know if you had something you wanted to add.
I just, I've been involved in a lot of meetings over the years. I just don't know how you run a meeting and move forward without using Robert's rules. So I think it's essential to this conversation. And to Bonnie's point, there's a lot of ways to pull a motion, an amendment off the floor, a motion off the floor. You could table it to the next meeting if you want to. But I just don't see how we make any progress without using Robert's rules to move forward. What's the alternative, I guess? So I would also say you should call the question.
Okay. Well, on this motion, which is to adopt Robert's Rules of Order. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Excuse me. Oh, technically, by Robert's rules, ironically, maybe, we have to vote on the call. Right. So we have to vote to call the question. If that passes, then we vote on the motion.
Well, actually, Nick, did you actually ask for the call?
Yeah.
Call the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So the question's been asked to be called. So all those in favor of calling this question, which will end discussion on the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Now back to the main motion is to adopt Robert's Rules of Order because the question's been called. There's no further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. I have to put my parliamentary procedure hat back on.
So I think that brings us back to Joe's point about creating some level of review process for policy.
Cool. Yeah, so Joe or Jay, I'm not sure how this falls with the vote we took before we voted for Robert's rules, but happy to follow Robert's rules. Do I need to make a motion for this?
Okay, so I make a motion that we put in some type, we put in a buffering mechanism for buffering mechanism policy when categories within PA 490 jump 20% or more from the prior evaluation period. I would love to hear lots about, I can talk about some of the details on that, but that's a motion, yes, on the floor. And I will be happy to amend it, draw a discussion.
Let me just see if I got this right.
Yeah, I'd like to hear
what I wrote down, and then we can get a second, just so to make sure. So what I heard was move to put a buffering mechanism policy when PA 490 values jump more than 20% during the valuation process.
For any given category. Not the values as a whole, but if a certain category were to jump, then there's a mechanism.
Okay, so evaluation process for any category.
Yeah.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ella. Okay. Now we have discussion on the motion, which was to recommend putting a buffering mechanism policy when PA 490 values jump more than 20% during the valuation process for any category.
My thoughts on that is that instead of this 2% cap, because I'm really or I guess now in addition to it, I'm sensitive to what these guys are saying about farmland just never increasing in value when you could have inflation at 7-8%. You could have you're going to have changes and things. And so the problem this year that things just went crazy, and then there wasn't a good process for fixing them before they became tax rate. And one way you might do that is if something jumps over 25%, that gets flagged, and maybe the policy is that the Department of Agriculture convenes a group of farmers to assess it. Maybe the policy is that they need to go back to those raw data that influence that category and see a sample size, if the sample size was adequate, see if there were maybe data collection errors, see those types of things. I think a lot of that could be solved in a way that's probably not legislative. I'm cautious with the reason I didn't like the 2.5% having go to legislators. I don't know what else can be thrown in there. Once you open up 490 in the legislature, you could run into a whole bunch of stuff.
John and then Kim.
So I want to make sure I understand the original motion we had voted on, which was 2.6%, capped at the 2.6% increase annually, which over a 5-year period would equate to a 13% increase in 5 years. That seems to me to function as a buffer or a cap that's within a reasonable number that this group's been talking about. If I'm understanding that correctly, does the 2.6 serve as the buffer? That's my question. And I guess in my mind it did when I voted on it, and 13% seems like a reasonable line in the sand.
Ella.
One is I thought it was 2.6% over the course of 5 years, not annually. So that's a big thing. And the other thing is that that's legislative. So just because the body said we're for this doesn't mean that it's happening. Whereas if we did something that was non-legislative, we could ensure that it happens, right? So both mechanisms can be pursued at the same time. And also, 2.6% over 5 years.
That, John?
Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you.
Other discussion? Yes, I'm sorry.
So it's good. I sort of put my head down. Last meeting we talked about it. I know it was voted down, and I would love to kind of bring it back into the conversation, because in order to have what you're talking about, Joe, you need an advisory panel. You need a group, unless it's, simply going back to the Department of Ag, which is kind of where it's lived right? And then we had this massive increase. And so now we all are saying, well, you know, how did that happen? And how do we build guardrails around it? So how do we implement such as this, Joe? Like, what if this were, and I know this was a conversation that now became a motion, which now we're going to be voting on, but alas, how does that get implemented in a truly thoughtful and productive way that's reflective of the data? Are we making that motion to say this nebulous panel will review this, or does that also become tethered to the rediscussing the idea of some type of advisory panel?
Joe, and then Bill.
Joe, Rafe, I mean, one of the things as I'm thinking about this that could occur in this buffering type mechanism is if the Department of Agriculture, upon receiving the contractor's valuations, right? So this past year's Farm Credit East valuations, if the policy was that the Department of Agriculture sees a jump greater than 25% or more, that they either do an internal reevaluation themselves of that category, or they hire a second contractor to do the evaluation of that category, which would then be charged with going through those data again. Because part of what happened this year was in the farm credit analysis, they chose somewhat arbitrarily sometimes certain data to pull from the survey and certain to not, especially with things like swampland is in my mind. So I think there are ways you could do this that ultimately what it would do is it would tell people to, hey, stop, wait a minute, what's going on here? Are these appropriate? And if they feel like they're not, then the Department of Agriculture could actually just reset that rate. They don't have to go with what was given by this past case, Farm Credit East. And there's some trust, right? We're putting in the Department of Agriculture if we have that type of thing. But just to kind of bring us to a point, for our farmland preservation program, we as a policy require 2 appraisals. And so when there are a difference, we have adopted the highest appraisal value per acre and use that for our offer to the landowner. Obviously, that's probably not the process that we want to go through this, but we could set as the policy as opposed to buffer that there are 2 appraisals that are conducted and then reviewed for consistency. And that would remove who's reviewing it or you know, an advisory panel or anything like this, but create some of that. I think what people are looking for is different sets of eyes on the documents that are available. So I can't make the motion, but if that's what you're aiming towards, I think that would be a way to do it that's consistent with other policy the department uses.
I don't know what Joe's idea should look like in action, but I feel like this is what should have happened. This is what I think most farmers who were tracking this issue wanted OPM and DOAC to be like, whoa, that was weird, and pump the brakes way before the October assessment values were released, way before all of this, and so to have a mechanism where that happened, where something's gone wrong and it gets fixed before it gets made public, that to me that would be fantastic. If it looks like 2 different, though I say, like, I mean, if 2 different organizations are using the same data and the same methodology and processing it the same way, you might get consistency even though something's gone squirrely, right? Like if neither one is considering 0 rental values, right? The results are going to be the same. Or if you're getting sloshing swampland with tillable A, the results are going to be the same. So I'm not sure that would solve it, but yeah, some sort of internal mechanism so that you guys are empowered to go, this isn't what was expected. Let's slow down. Let's go back. Let's have that flexibility to have results that are fair, equitable, and transparent. It makes sense.
Jenny Kipsikevich, I'm going to try to choose my words wisely so that they're not misunderstood. Does this require a legislative change to have checks and balances when you already have the charge to do the job, right? So So Ella, I think that more internal, we're gonna use this checks and balances within our own departments because that's already our charge from the law. And that's just the procedure we're gonna follow moving forward, is that we are gonna like checks and balance. I'm just asking, like, I personally don't think this needs to be a legislative change to add in a buffer system, a checks and balances, or whatever we want to call it, when your departments are already tasked to that job. It's just how interdepartmentally, I don't know, whatever language you want to use, you are choosing to give the final information to the public, I guess.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think the way I see it is, as you just stated, it's more of, of internal policy, on it rather than a legislative, change on that sense. Cause it's just, it's kind of like, here's a trigger for us to look at. We have what we call, standard operating procedures, for a lot of programs we go through. This is how we kind of do it and everything else, where there's not like one officially written up here, but we have this is our process that we go through doing this. We have a timeline, everything else. And part of that would be adding this piece into here. When we get to this point, boom, does it hit this trigger? Okay, go back to this step and do another review type of thing. So I see it that way as a policy.
And I'll just add, the charge from the governor is to recommend alternative measures to improve data collection, review, and valuation processes consistent with state law. So this would be within that charge.
Bill? I just want to offer some caution to the current motion that's before us. I think it's a good idea and certainly something that we should explore, but we're about to vote on a percentage that was thrown out there with no data behind it, right? So I think if we're going to pursue this as a potential option, we should at least look at the last 5 schedules or recommended values that came out from OPM and see what the jumps were in those particular years, right? We throw 25% out there because it just came to the top of mind and it seems like a big number. But again, when we're dealing with these smaller acreage values, 25% is somewhat negligible when you're talking about a $40 per acre swampland value, right? 25% of that. So I just want to provide some caution as we're about to vote on something that has no data behind it. We just threw a percentage out there and now we're going to recommend it. We should relax a little bit. Ella?
Well, Ken, do you have an alternative, like inflation plus some buffer or CPI plus some buffer?
No, I think a percentage, Billy, I think a percentage could be a fair thing that we try to implement in our policies, but it should be based in something, right? So if we can go back for the past 5 recommended values and say, okay, in 2020, it rose by, I think the percentages are actually going to surprise some people in the room. We may see in 2020 that it rose by 30%. We may see in 2015 that it rose by 30%, right? So when we throw 25 out there, what I don't want to pin ourselves into is every time this happens, the trigger is caught because they are such small, relatively speaking, numbers. The numbers are small, so the percentages get affected differently by a small number. So we don't want this trigger to be pumped every time. And especially we might see if we did this, it could happen probably relatively quickly. We might see that every time we do this, the values go up by 25%. And then we say, okay, our trigger has to be 50% or 75%. So we don't find ourselves having, or DOAG or any other entity having to do this every single time we do a reevaluation of farmland values.
So Bill, to that, just trying to brainstorm here. So look, I understand what you're talking about is use 5 years, that's past 25 years, because remember we're on a 5-year cycle, or you say 3 years or whatever the number is. Okay, that'd be 15 years. You take those there and you come up, what was the average increase? And that becomes your benchmark, if you would. Like, that's what you're looking at, just to try to help.
At least we can base the discussion off of that. If we say, okay, every time it's been going up 30%.
You have a benchmark and it can be changed, as you keep it rolling benchmark, if you will, because it would be, as you do the next one, then it, would change. That way you're not stuck to that piece.
That would,
Understanding.
that would be my thought.
That could be an amendment. If that's what's being offered, is that the create whatever review trigger is based on the average previous five cycles, which triggers the review. That you would need to make that as an amendment, and then we need to take a vote on that. Have a conversation about, do the members feel that that is the right way to do it, or is it 3, or is it 7, or is it some other, or is it picking a number?
Oh, yeah.
We make an amendment just to table it till we get that information. That's possible. I agree with what Bill's saying, but we don't know that data. I mean,
I can table my motion. That doesn't bother me. One last point of discussion for me on it, and people say if you want me to table, I'm happy to do that. If the 2.5% doesn't pass the legislator, and that's to me is an arbitrary number, 2.6%. That doesn't pass, then we don't have a buffering mechanism. So, but I'll table my motion if we want, and then let's talk about something else. Well, this would be an amendment. If Bill can make an amendment to change what the buffering trigger is.
If you want, or, I know it was suggested, if we want we can pull, those figures out and come up with what that 5-year average is to give everyone an example before you vote on it. We can do that at the next meeting if you want to do it that way, if you want to table it and do that. So that way you have a little more background on it. That's up to, you want to.
Do I propose that amendment or what?
Well, I don't know. Well, it's either, you can either do an amendment that you want to do it by what Bill has recommended, or you could withdraw the motion, and table it until the next meeting.
Yeah, well, let me table it till the next meeting. We can always make another motion or revisit that one. Yeah. So I'll table it. Okay. Amendment.
Second.
Okay, Ella, you had the original, you had the original second on that. You're fine with tabling.
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay.
Tabling a motion is independent from the motion.
Right.
All we're doing, this is independent, so if you table a motion and it's accepted, then you take it off the table subsequent time.
Right. Right. So it's a motion right now is just to table the existing motion.
So
we've got here.
If people are looking for some data points from 2010 to 2015, Tibble A went up 82%, Tibble B went up 87%, Tibble C went up 168%, Tibble D went up 204%. From 2005 to 2010, Tibble A was 2,400, Tibble B was 1,600, Tibble C was 400. I'm sorry, 197%, 222%, 90%, 67%. So Bill, you're asking for what those values are. Obviously that's, that's 2 cycles from 2000 to 2005. Tibble A was 101%, Tibble B was 103%, Tibble C was 111%, Tibble D was 105%. From 95 to 2000, it was 100%, 175%, 148%, 119%, 123%. So to your point, Bill, the question is, where do you set it? And is, 25 the right number when we just went through that, the lowest one went up was 55%. So I think, Fran, I don't know if that's enough information for what you're looking for, but it gives you an idea of, for the past 30 years, where those increases have been.
Jenny Kipsikevich, do you happen to have what the percent increase from 2020 to 2025 prior to I'm talking about the original version. Maybe that's the one we need to look at, because that's obviously what triggered a lot of emotions. Do you happen to know that? You might not have that because it's been changed. So I don't know.
We have it against the 2025 revised numbers.
Okay. But that is the one that triggered a lot of the kind of, whoa, what happened, right?
Ella has those percentages.
Yeah, going back to 1977, so from 72 to 77.
Do you have the one, Ella, though, from the original 2025 release back in October compared to 2020?
They rescinded.
Yeah.
Because that's what triggered this.
That's what I have.
Probably don't have it, because those are just actual.
No, those are the actuals. Might be there. I mean, I know, I can think of some, Joe or Ape,
Was-
so pasture land went from like 200
That was-
to 970.
Yep.
Swampland went from 40 to 800 and something. Forest land dropped from 350 to 200.
Yeah, swamp and ledge went up 2,300%, pasture went up 480%.
That 25% is arbitrary. That, in my motion, the 25%, I'm not emotionally tied to that in any way, so I appreciate this conversation.
But some of them went down and some went up. But regardless, it's the need to have some kind of cap.
But 100% is a lot. 100% on tillable land that's valued at $1,200 an acre, jumping to $2,400 an acre is quite a bit, especially if that's just tillable land, because there's not a lot of tillable land in some of these towns, so that those taxes could go up quite a bit.
Thanks, everybody.
So we're at the point of tabling the motion. So all those in favor of tabling the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, we will get some further info on that and then bring that up, future meeting. Okay.
I guess
go ahead.
To get to a conclusion there, the conversation could be create a buffer or create a percentage as a recommendation. What that is has to be based on some level of rolling average, as opposed to not determining do we want an internal review process. Right.
Yeah, I think everyone's just looking at trying to have, what is that right basis? I mean, that's really what I think I'm hearing the conversation is. It's like, is the 25% the right number? If we look at this rolling average, let's do that and provide them with the numbers at the next meeting, to say this is, where we're at with that. That's what I'm hearing from that. Rather than leaving it open-ended and making a motion, they want to know what the numbers are before they vote on it. That's my understanding and take.
John, Emmanuel, I just want to make sure who's going to be in charge of the task of putting this together.
Oh, just raised your hand.
I have the data going back to 1972 and already have the percentages, so I'm literally emailing it to them right now.
We'll get that out to everybody. Thank you. I know I have them back in the office, all the numbers, so we can run whatever too, so thanks. Okay. Other than that, okay. Well, let's move on to the next item, which is implement mill rate caps for farmland. The note there was this creates predictability, review every 5 years. This would be similar to the old, which there's only a few left of the 10 mil forest land. This would be a legislative piece if we were going to put a mill rate cap in, saying this was what every town has to have, the same mill rate on farmland. Your assessment value may be different, but the mill rate would be the same regardless of whether you lived in Greenwich or you lived in Stores, type of thing. If you think of it, it's similar to the mill rate cap on motor vehicles. Middle vehicle cap can't be higher than this. So that would be, the cap of, what the highest could be on it. I'll open that for discussion because that was one of the recommendations that move forward here.
We need a motion on it, or can we discuss it?
You can discuss. I mean,
make a motion, you discuss it. If you're using Robert's rules, everything's based on a motion. So I move not to move forward with this recommendation.
Second that.
Joe, did you second it? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to
it's all
capture.
good.
I was typing and I wasn't looking up. Okay, it's been moved and seconded not to move forward with this recommendation. So discussion. Fran, sorry.
Fran Whalen, I agree with the motion, but I would like to hear from our assessors what their thoughts may be possible.
No, go ahead. What you're doing is creating another a separate category evaluation by creating a mill rate cap specific to PA 490. So I know, well, I'll speak for myself, I would be against it.
Excuse me, could you pick, I can't hear you very well down here.
So I just said what you'd be basically doing is creating another category to value in essence by creating a specific cap for farmland. I personally would be against it.
Member Brash, I'll also join in. I think that when you start talking about separate mill rates, that gets to be fairly complicated. Because now you're taking, certain parcel out of the entire neighborhood, and that one gets taxed at this rate, and this gets taxed at that rate. Are you talking about the entire property, including buildings, houses, whatever? Or are you talking just the land that's under the assessment of 490? So you're kind of complicating things significantly when you start having separate rates for different properties.
Paul Larson, yeah, I would agree from what I'm hearing, and it certainly to implement something like this would kind of go against our overall goal of simplifying this process and making it easier for both farmers and municipalities. So I would support the motion to not consider this.
Other discussion?
Well, I mean, just to poke holes, how does this affect farmland? That's in a high, that's already in an area where there's a lot of development pressure, where there's much higher rates because of the amount of people, the influx of people moving in from outside of state, from cities into the rural areas, which is happening a lot on the western part of the state, where you've got some old farms there. The idea of having an ability to create something that's flat so that they don't have these big fluctuations where their mill rates may be going dramatically up, and that disadvantages that farm versus other farms in the state. I just wanted to play devil's advocate and throw that out there as we're discussing this.
Damon Brash, just to respond real quickly, you have to understand that a reduction in one person's assessment equals an increase in another's. When you have large categories, let's say Lebanon, that live, tremendous amount of farmland, that forces a higher tax rate on everyone else by default, because you're not getting the same amount of revenue that you would from a residential development. That's the design. We understand that. But now we're talking about breaking different categories and even furthering that reduction. And again, once you provide a discount here, it causes an increase here. There's one budget that the municipality has, and they need an X amount of dollars in revenue in order to maintain that budget. And if you're only getting a smaller wedge from this portion, then you have to take more from the other. So again, we're looking at equity. We're trying to find that down. The process now already involves lower rates based on their actual use. We're recognizing the farm use of the property and giving them the discount that goes with that. So I think that we're kind of, again, more you shift on one end, you shift it to someone else.
Kim and then Joe.
Well, just to respond to that, and I understand what you're saying. However, Connecticut is not a large commercial, large commodity-based agricultural state. By and large, farms are owned, they're family owned. So families, those homes they're already paying those rates, those tax rates on their property tax for their home. And it's significant. And when you choose to live in a more rural area, because it's nice, and my neighbors, their property value is greater because they have a view of my farm. So when you choose to live in those areas, you understand there's a price for that. I'm not on top of each other. We're not on top of each other, and there's a price. You don't get to share that tax rate, but that doesn't mean that we should disadvantage the farmers, because this law is based on use and keeping farms farmable. And again, just playing devil's advocate there, but I do feel that we have to keep that in mind, that in this state, by and large, they are family farms that are already paying taxes on their homes.
So is this process here to reduce the tax burden to farmers or come up with an equitable valuation process? Because if we're going to talk about focusing on reducing the burden on farmers, that's another category. That's, again, now we're talking about rates, we're talking about caps, we're talking about all these things to limit those costs, right? That's not the same.
Can I jump in, Joe, or if you're just jumping on mill rates here? I appreciate the point there, Kim, but I think the actual irony of it is that when you have people coming in and building big, fancy, expensive houses, the mill rate tends to drop because those houses are valued so much higher than the little farmhouse that was there prior. I just did some quick Googling, like we can pick on Greenwich, no offense to anybody in Greenwich, but like Greenwich's mill rate is 10% or 10, it's not percent, 10. Town of Union is like 28, 32, depending on the year. The smallest town in Connecticut. So I appreciate your concern there, but I think the actual irony is it's the opposite when high value land comes in. So I'd push this one to a vote if we can. What's that? All the questions. Thank you. Keep us straight here.
Okay, so question has been called, which will mean it will end discussion. So all those in favor of calling the question signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that does that. So we go back to, I'm sorry. Yeah, correct. Yes, is to move forward the recommendation to implement mill rate caps as the main motion. So all those in favor, which means not to move forward, signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. So then the next two that we have, similar but different. First one is implement a flat tax rate per acre per classification for farmland across the state. And it was, the numbers that were in the original recommendation were $100 per acre for active, $50 for non-productive. And just context, if you look at the one above it, was implement flat statewide valuation rates for farmland by classification, $1,000 acre active and $50 per acre non-productive. Both of these would be legislative, but I just wanted to show context. So there's a slight difference between them, but of the recommendations there. So we're at the first one of implementing a flat tax rate per acre, which is different than the valuation. So it's a flat tax rate per acre per classification.
Move.
Go ahead.
Not to move forward with items 9 and 11.
I'm sorry, just repeat that.
Move not to move forward with items 9 and 11.
I second.
Ella? Yep. Thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded not to move forward with these two items of implementing the flat statewide valuation or the flat tax rate. So discussion.
My only thought on that, maybe this is a separate one. For some things like swamp and ledge, it makes sense for that to be flat. But on the other hand, if we're going rental values and nobody's renting swamp and ledge, and we have a good sort of questionnaire rental valuation process, maybe my concern on that isn't gonna be realized. So, just. That's my thought on it.
Other discussion? Hearing none, I don't think anyone that's online that has a hand up. Did they, Amanda? Okay, no, it's okay. I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Hearing no other discussion. So all those in favor to not move forward with these two recommendations signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Okay, the next, oh, I'm sorry.
If people are interested, Ella did send over a spreadsheet with the historical data. We can pull it up and pick up that motion that was tabled to review. Go under your inbox there.
I know, it's like literally right. Hold on.
Modern technology.
That's just.
I get it. Something shows up on my phone. I'm waiting. It's like, open this.
It's true. It's very true.
Ella, I move that we keep this tabled until we go through the rest of the motions.
You want to just hold on? Okay. That's fine. We can just wait. We were just.
Your enthusiasm over the data. I share it.
That's good. Nope. Okay. So let's look at reporting. Is create a statewide contact database, mandated reporting through the town for data. This would be through local assessors reporting to the state. And we kind of talked about this originally with some of the valuation pieces on here, but that was the recommendation, was making it, a mandated reporting, through the town, through like the local assessor's office, of creating a statewide contact, database. I open that up for.
And this was specifically landowners with land in 490?
Correct.
For that database that.
Yes. Yeah, this is just PA 490, landowners.
Yeah, I mean, do we want a motion or? All right, I'll make a motion that we approve creating a statewide contact database. Mandated reporting through town for data for 490.
Second.
You second that? Sorry, Nick.
Nick.
Nick that seconded it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a motion to, for this recommendation, discussion.
Yeah, I had created a spreadsheet and I didn't have the chance to share it with Bill or Fran yet, but I did send it to the mailbox last night. I think one of the gaps we experienced with this whole work group, or why we're here, is getting updated, appropriate contact information. And I think it's extremely important. I've said this at previous meetings, that if a spreadsheet like this is created and owned by Department of Ag and OPM, and the spreadsheet is pretty much locked, except for those fields that are edited with information, that this spreadsheet gets sent to all of the local assessors, they own it, and to be able to update information accordingly. But it's not intent to capture the specifics of, this is 2 acres of tillable A, this is 5 acres of swamp, or anything like that. That's from the survey. This is really the contact information to be able to go back, once this is updated and DOAG is ready for the 5-year reval, that these are sent back to DOAG and uploaded consistently into one spreadsheet. And you should have at least 95% accuracy of the contact information to be able to send out that information, the survey and all of that stuff. So the intent here is to have one complete manageable spreadsheet that shows the owners. If we want to add criteria to this, that's what's open for discussion. This was just my first pass. And I think what I was thinking of was not to make it, a heavy burden on the assessors.
Go ahead, Damien.
Sure. Thank you, Damon. So we give all kinds of reports on a regular basis. In this month, we are required to provide a list of all classified property to the state. Names and addresses could be included to that. In addition to that, the state already has all these applications for income taxes and tax benefits. There's another application on source of name and address from there as well. So it kind of depends upon which you think is the most accurate. I hate to admit it, but I would almost vary to say that the assessor's records might not be as accurate as a tax return, because that has to go to the right address, and that's very important. But updating your mailing address with the assessor's office is kind of an afterthought that only comes in later. So, I don't have any issues with harvesting data, but I think there are better sources for it.
Paul?
Well, I think I would envision that at the local level, at the municipality, they would know which landowners have land enrolled in 490. And through the distribution of that survey that we talked about earlier, it would go, that could be maybe a state document so that all towns are consistent. But that would be mailed out from I would envision that would be mailed out from the assessor's office to the landowners in town. They would receive it and then could, if there's any need for that information to go to the state, fine. But I'm not sure what this database that the state is going to maintain is for, or what it's going to accomplish.
This kind of goes back to my QDS system. I think we're making it very complicated here. We're adding a legislative layer that I personally don't feel needs to be there. If we're talking about making sure that surveys get out to assess the land, then I think there are other mechanisms in place that allow us to capture that without creating a lot of paperwork. I mean, I can't even imagine, like, I think that there is another method to accomplish getting the surveys into the hands of the people that need to have it.
Chris?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that Connecticut General Statute 12-107D, paragraph K, does require on an annual basis that assessors report to the state forester all of their PA 490 classifications. There's a form that we provide. We keep a record of that. Most assessors fill out the form, and they also provide us Excel sheets. I think they run a query of some sort that provides name, address, and acres. I will say that it's due to the state forester's office each June 30th, and we typically will send out several friendly reminders to municipalities, and by around October, we figure we've gotten what we're gonna get without going into any type of like threatening phase. And I will say between 83 and 90% of the towns report on a regular basis. So compliance is pretty good. We could easily share these Excel sheets. They'll be 130 or so, whomever wanted to utilize them for a contact basis. I think it would capture a lot of the information that we're discussing now.
I think the only hazard to that is that it would also include open space classifications.
Yeah, it does include farm, forest, and open space. You would have to then, take that data and then scrub it for the farm information. But a lot of it is, assessors are doing this. Maybe we could look at the form and modify it a little to meet the needs of what we're discussing.
John? Yeah, John Emanuel. Yeah, I'm totally on board. If there's a current mechanism to capture all of this data, updated landowner data, then I'm all for it. And to Jenny's point, we certainly don't need to add another layer of data capturing. It's just that from past experience, we've seen problem getting updated landowner information. From the last survey. Folks had to go back to the prior survey from 6 years ago, and then even going back to 2015 to see who owned what land. So whatever mechanism portrays the latest updated information and maintains that, I'm all for it. And if that's the direction we want to further discuss, then I'm more than happy to withdraw my motion.
Just for some information for everybody. So UConn received over 5,000 farm data points. And they chose to use a 30-acre threshold to cut the list of who was receiving a survey. So I'm not so sure that the list is necessarily the major problem. Maybe it's the 30-acre threshold that reduced their sample size from 5,000 to 1,000 and then 11% response rate. So just consider that as part of the conversation.
Then, or Fran, sorry.
Fran Whalen. Whatever way of gathering this information, I think is critical for further mailers that get out. I think if the assessors keep a list of their active 490 name, addresses, keep it up to date, it's critical to give it to the state when we need these surveys to be done. They'll have the most accurate information. I wonder about the forestry. Do they have exact plot of land? Are you obtaining that? The plot of land, who owns it, who leases it? Do you get all that stuff? What do you get from your info?
So we do not receive from qualified foresters each and every landowner report they provide to the assessor. The qualified foresters are required to send us on an annual basis a sample, one of the reports that they've done, and then a list of other reports that they provided. That's a quality assurance, quality control component within the regulations. The information for the qualified foresters report that goes to the assessor does include a map of the parcel, and within that parcel, the area that is qualified as forest land. So it should be clear that you can have a 30-acre parcel with a house lot, and whatever the minimum zoning is for that location, that's automatically removed if there is a house, if there's a structure, and then the remainder of it qualified. So 30-acre parcel may have 28 acres of forest land, 2 acres residential.
Because my thing and John's concern is also we don't have one housing area for all this information. I know the assessors, they may know who owns the 490 land, but they don't know who leases it. Just to get that information out there by the state or OPM, I think if there's some way to have a data source to get this out there more accurately, and get more returns on surveys, I think is an important part. I don't know how to do it, or this is not the way we want to go, but some database, I guess that's
And I think just to add to that is, we have, as we said, the databases are there. There's a lot of databases there. Can they be improved upon? Most likely, as been talked about here and everything else. The underlying problem is getting people to respond to a survey. And we've got the information. We know, DOAG has lists, DEEP has lists, everyone has lists, of people to get the info out to them. It's getting that survey back, as you just mentioned, is, more of the issue. There are ways I think we can enhance, the database, if you will, or the several databases if we need to get more information there. But ultimately, it comes down to how do we get the people to return the surveys, if we're going to stick with that methodology. Joe
or APJ, one of the things that this brings me back around to is what we talked about earlier with mandated farmer reporting or not. And I like the idea of a centralized database for this. I kind of like that idea of a centralized database with data than a centralized database with just contact information. The contact information is valuable if we're going to go through the survey process, but if we're going to, in the survey process, conduct a sample of farmers like was done this year versus everybody's data, then that's less complete. So to me, ideally, and maybe this isn't a practical suggestion, is some way of farmers reporting every 5 years or whatever basis like was discussed earlier, and then those data coming back to DOAG or OPM for a centralized database versus specifically contact information that then could be used or not accurate or something like that.
Kim, and then John.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Joe. And once you have a database and if you're filling out a form annually, there isn't a need for a survey anymore, right? Where the aim there is that you're running every 5 years queries and really looking at the data and seeing where things went up, how many more people are now raising cattle versus how many dairy farms are no longer in service, that kind of thing where we can really start to look at. And I do believe that we need to spend some time, not today, obviously, but drilling down on what those data points are specifically, because that's going to be really enlightening. And then the hope would be that we can just move away from having an outside contractor doing this 5-year survey, which seemed to kind of be where things went awry.
Can I get clarity on how a landowner who is leasing, let's say I have 50 acres of hay fields, I don't farm, someone else cuts that hay as a lease, but I have those hay fields in PA 490. How does that work? How does that person get enrolled into PA 490 as a farm? Do they say this is farm land and then they prove it with the farmers? Tax form?
The owner applies, and then the back side of the application is a spot for the lessee to fill in their information, and we will double check that against a personal property declaration filed on that form. So there's a check and balance system, but yes, it is both the owner and then the lessee both fill out that application.
So if you had landowners reporting who are in PA 490 farmland, you wouldn't have a need to survey farmers on what they're paying for rental values, because the landowners who are renting land could say, this is what I'm collecting for rent on my land.
Right.
If they do, but.
Right.
It feels like, so we're on, the motion's on this thing, on this spreadsheet, and it feels like the conversation is moving to something that Ben and Keith and Paul proposed on the proposal. I don't know how we want to deal with that. This is Robert's rules, but it seems like that we're talking. The motion is on a database, and then the interest is in like, oh hey, can we just annually capture all this information?
Unknown caller.
So.
Yeah, so Ella, they are two separate things, on it, and for that, and I think just on the piece of looking at capturing annually, if you back and look at UConn's original report, one of the recommendations in their original report too was, try to collect data on a more regular cycle. So that way you weren't doing it later. So that kind of coincides back to, some of that there. And that could be, part of, current practice. It's like, okay, we're not going to make this, do this annually. And that could, I think future, next meeting, we can, explore that more in depth, because we have talked about, it was voted down as a recommendation to create an annual reporting. That was one of the recommendations, but it got voted down by the group. Definitely can be brought back again, and discussed, for that, or some sort of application every year to capture that information of the survey in order to maintain your PA 490 values. But that recommendation kind of got voted down at the, when we went through this process. But I said anything can be, brought back up and be discussed as well. So, with that, we should look at, where we are. We've got about 15 minutes left. Is looking at, do we want to, right now the motion is to create a statewide contact database for mandated reporting of PA 490 landowners, from, through the towns. Obviously, we heard, that there is already a state reporting that's required to, deep on it. There may be ways of enhancing that, as well, as a, piece already there. So, that's where we are with our motion. So, kind of what we've been discussing.
You could amend the motion if it's friendly, if the group decides to include mandated reporting of the data on a separate form or in addition to the M28, to capture that if that's the little.
I kind of like the idea of keeping them separate, but Commissioner, I feel like you're the person or your department is the one that might be most affected by this. Do you feel that there is a need to have more than there is already, or do you feel that there's a need for you to be able to access what there already is in a way that would require something from this working group?
I'm not sure I follow the question. I'll say the challenge isn't getting the list of who we have, the farmers, but to Joe's point, it's also the landowners who are impacted by this, and that's a separate list. That's the assessors have that. The assessors did do outreach as part of the underlying survey. The challenge isn't getting people to understand that there's a survey out there necessarily. It's getting people to respond to a survey, and I don't know that this drives home that requirement that would then give better information or more data points to use in the assessment. But that's if the group says, well, we mandated create a list through the assessors and a mandated reporting requirement by the farmer. I mean, that will certainly give us better data that follows the UConn recommendation of a more regular data collection. But I think, we still have to get to the point of survey responses. And I think Kim made this point that if you're collecting this data through town halls on an annual basis, maybe you don't need a survey. You don't need to figure out how to get people to respond to a survey that they're clearly not inclined to if you look through our historical data.
Jenny Kipsikevich, I just want to highlight the point that if our farm received a survey, we did not see it. Maybe because it got emailed to us and went to spam, or maybe it was a postcard. So I just want to point out that I 100% agree with you that getting people to fill out surveys, I work for an organization that tries this all the time, so I fully support that getting people to respond. I just don't know if the surveys got into the hands of the right people, right? And so that's how come I keep going back to what systems are already in play that have to get out to those landowners, and that's their tax bill. Their tax bill goes to them faithfully every year. Those assessors know where they need to retrieve the money from because that is governed by the governed meaning operationally, it's a procedure for the town. And so I personally feel strongly that might be our avenue to getting them to knowing securely that every PA 490 landowner received it, right? Right now, I don't know if I can say that every landowner or farmer received whatever percent, the 1,000 surveys that you guys sent out, I don't know if I can actually say with, conviction that yes, everyone got it. But if we know that it went out in their tax bill, then you guys can actually say, we know that it went out in every tax bill. Whether that person returned it or not that onus is on them, not on us. So I guess I just feel that how we're getting that survey out is also a critical piece in addition to how it gets returned back.
Fran Whalen, I just have to agree with Jenny. I don't recall receiving the survey at our farm either. Maybe it was there, I overlooked it or whatever, but I think there needs to be one centralized database maybe. That sounds like OPM has one, Department of Ag has one. I don't know if you guys could combine, put them all together as one and then go down that way. But I just think that it could be done better. This route to do better or another route that you guys could work on to do better, as well as work with the assessors. Assessors know who's in their towns. Thank you.
Damon Brush. I'm sorry. Go ahead, David. I just wanted to chime in. I support an annual questionnaire. Regular intervals seem to be more supportive. Again, that was supported through the research. I just want to throw a little caution out on the tax bill situation because a lot of people have escrows and they never see a bill because the bills are actually directed towards the bank and the bank pays the amount that comes due. And then they might get something in August and September that says your escrow amount was off.
Fair.
So tax bill is not necessarily a reliable method to reach every individual.
Is there a way to use that system, Damien? Like, I don't know enough about like how, I'm just trying to think about what systems are already in play that our towns are using, our municipalities are using to get these people, right? Like when taxes aren't paid, the tax collector will find the homeowner regardless of the bank at some point, right? I don't have the answer. I'm just saying, is there an answer within a system that's already in play within the?
So like we said before, we do have records. We do maintain property addresses. They may change depending upon whether the owner notifies us or not. So that's some variance that's in there. Generally, once it's in, it doesn't change very often. It could, but it doesn't necessarily. So we use that system, whether it be our computer system, mass appraisal system, our quality data administrative system, or whatever, but we use those systems to generate our reports. Again, we have our Department of Forestry report due this month. So we're going to go to those systems. We're going to say, hit this report. The report that comes out currently doesn't have addresses or other vital information that you're looking for, but that doesn't mean it's not attainable. We have it in the database, but it's not one of the requirements that's submitted. So, if there was some act that said every assessor must provide a mailing, been discussed, to those individuals, we will know who has a qualification or who has a classification. Whether that goes into a centralized database at the state or whether each municipality maintains it, I'm not sure, but yeah, we know who owns what property.
Ella, then Ben.
So the database question and the capturing information yearly questions seem entwined to me. Like we can't do a good job of answering one and then doing the other. So I move that we table this discussion and get a game plan for what next steps are. But I don't want to, Ben, if you had something.
That's a valid motion. I'll second that motion. I'll save one.
That's what Ben was going to do.
It's a little late before later, but.
Okay, it's been moved to table this. We discuss it further. Later date. Any discussion on motion to table? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. We don't have any public that signed up for public comment today, anything, just so. Yeah, I know. Give me 1 second. Just so you know, so we don't have to, not allotting any time as, the end here for that. Just wanted to alert people that, but we do need a few minutes just to set up our next meeting schedule and everything else. And I know we still got a couple items left here, but Ben, go ahead.
At the risk of immediately being tabled, I move to, with every person that applies for PA 490 goes to the assessor's office for the application. So I move that as part of the application process, there is a requirement that there be annual reporting of basically the survey information to be worked out that needs to get tweaked. And also, in deference to Damon's comments about that annually is probably the best way to go in order to get the information. So in line with the Farm Bureau or farmer's recommendation on this sheet, we have as part of that application, if you receive this discount on your taxes, you also are required to do this annual reporting, including the zero, all these things that we've been discussing around here. This needs to get so it's a requirement to do annual reporting.
Second. That was Paul. Was that you? Oh. Yeah. So just to paraphrase that I got this right, that the motion is that part of the PA 490 application process that there be an annual reporting, of the survey information, from the landowner. It would be the landowner that would be doing this, correct? So I just wanted, trying to put together.
That's exactly it. I had a lot of provisos, but that's
okay. Make sure I got something. Okay, so we have a motion. Make sure and seconded. That part of the PA 490 application process that there be an annual reporting of survey information from the landowner. So discussion, Paul.
Well, I'll just I guess for clarification purposes, amend that motion to, because this is for an application for 490. I think we need to obviously include existing 490 beneficiaries. So somehow incorporate current landowners that are benefiting from 490 into this annual reporting process.
So possibly just take out the application as part of the PA 490 process, that there be an annual reporting.
Yeah.
Take out the word application.
that is a friendly amendment.
Thank you. We just take out the word application there, so.
And Ben, just for my clarification, is this in place of the survey or is this in addition to a 5-year survey?
You're getting
Great. No, I just want to make sure.
Surveyed. Like, I don't want to nail that down because we need to have more complete, robust discussion about what needs to be included there.
Yeah.
And all these aspects. And there's some very valid aspects that have come out. But in terms of the actual reporting, it's going to be an annual process incumbent upon the landowner who receives this benefit.
And we had discussed the 5-year interval or timing on that, but I agree with Damon's comment that we do the other ones, we do the M28s every year, and if this comes out every 5 years, no one's going to know what it is. No one's going to remember what they did 5 years ago. So I think the annual reporting makes more sense.
Damon?
Yeah, I mean, to repeat the exact same thing, annual would be better. And I ended up losing my train of thought while I was waiting. For the reporting process itself, is this going to be kept and maintained on an individual municipal basis, or is this information going to be submitted, say, through the state? Because there's lots of ways you can do surveys. We can get the information, but then we got to then ship it to someplace else or whatever the case may be. I kind of think that, again, what was briefly discussed was maybe a little QR code or something like that, where you go into a centralized database and you can load that data that way. I think there should be cause and effect. I think that if you're going to do that, and if you get someone who doesn't file, There are some ramifications for that incentivizes them to do so. Again, the question would be how that information is tracked and handled once it's gathered. Is it something that towns then turn around and submit to Department of Ag, or does Department of Ag go through a centralized database? I mean, that's what you did last year when you tried to do the survey. You tried to get as much email correspondence and web questionnaire. I'm sure you could put a 8-point website together that just says, what's your acreage, what's your product, so on and so forth, and obtain that information. So I'm in favor of it. I'm just questioning how the process will then work, who's capturing the data, who's moving the data, how it goes.
So, yeah, so just one sec, Joe. So one part of this was mentioned earlier under 12-107D, subparagraph K, that their assessors already have to report to the, this could be something that gets added to that, which obviously would be a legislative change, which is fine. We'd have to do that with the annual reporting anyways. So there is a mechanism that's already in place to just say, okay, this additional data gets part of that report that gets submitted in that sense. So that could cover that piece of it. So that way it's collected annually, which then fits into the recommendations as a.
It is collected by the municipality and then reported annually to people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because they're already reporting now. So it's like, here's the additional information we would need, for that. And obviously that would be a legislative, piece that would have to be done that way as a suggestion. Joe.
So just one thing we should think about this, is this going to apply to forest landowners or not? I think it'd be great if it didn't. The other thing, I would call this a census versus like a survey, if we're going to require everybody to do it. And then finally, for teeth of this, I would hate to see somebody get kicked out because they didn't get the mail. They just forgot. That could be catastrophic to a farm, to get kicked out of 490 for a year. Taxes could go up tens of thousands of dollars. And so, and it may have got lost in the mail, and that could be a real problem. So for me, the teeth of this might be an investigation by the assessor if you're still farming, right? Some sort of like, hey, you didn't apply for this. That might trigger the assessor going, are you still farming? I'm going to come out for a visit. That type of threat would be more appealing to me than and if assessors actually did that, they may find like, hey, this person didn't report and they're not farming, or who knows what.
So the most is for a requirement to report. You guys, we could debate what happens if you don't. Let's just stick to the concept for the purposes of moving this ahead.
Kim, and then Chris.
Yeah, just to add to that, I know when we didn't know anything about PA 490. It was actually Joan Nichols, when we joined the Farm Bureau, who kind of informed us, hey, make sure you do this, this, and this. And we were at that point where I think it had to be resubmitted. So another aspect to that is ensuring that new owners, we have a way to
Real quick,
them
we
abreast
are
of that.
required to notify anybody who purchases property that is classified of the benefits in classifying the property and encourage them to reapply. We're required to do that.
Who's required to do that?
Assessors.
Maybe
We have to
don't all do
notify the
that.
new owner that the prior owner had it classified, benefits of, and that they should consider.
We clarify if this motion is applying to forest land or just farmland?
No, this is intended for farmland.
And would it be open, not open space?
Open space is a whole different program.
Not maritime.
Chris. Yeah.
That was my, just wanted that exact point of clarification. We had earlier took a motion and voted on that further discussions would not impact the process for forest land classification. So that's settled. Not for me. Yep. In my mind too. So.
Other discussion?
Just Joe or AJ, we talked maybe maritime. Mike, how do you feel about, I mean,
I'm not,
applying that motion to maritime as well?
Friendly amendment.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Okay with you, Paul, friendly amendment?
Yes, yes.
Which was what? I'm sorry, because I can't hear everybody maritime. All right,
It applies to maritime and farmland.
thank you.
Just for information, we already collect the maritime information. And we hopefully, so we don't necessarily need a mandated reporting because we already have that. Although, just George, it may apply to if we had like a farmyard category and maritime have a property that they use for sorting traps or whatever.
Yeah, so there are a lot of state leases and then maritime that do get reported to the state, but there are also privately owned and deeded properties that might fall through the cracks that could be reported on just for more knowledge in evaluation.
Damon Rush, just real quick point of clarification, if I could. There is a statutory difference between maritime heritage land and underwater farmland. So underwater farmland is a new classification, and that is the shellfish beds. Maritime is waterfront property, specifically. So it's only that waterfront property where the boats come in and the shellfish are processed. So, you know, there's differences. I don't want to get the two of them crossed into each other.
Which is, they're both in 490 currently. What's the?
So maritime heritage has additional requirements that require that the person be a licensed fisherman, that certain amount of income is derived from.
Separate categories.
Separate category. Now, underwater farmland is included in the general definition of farmland now. So within the last 5 years, they added another category that included underwater farmland, which is just normal farmland, but it's underwater. So there's differences in how those are treated. One of the things that I had asked before is that when we have these new rates, they only refer to tillable land. Underwater land is not tillable.
Right. Who's going to assess it?
It is assessable.
Who does the assessment?
The municipality, the assessor. And that's based on, again, whatever valuation that would bear. Underwater farmland to me is I really think because there's no benefit in classifying it under PA 490. You can't penalize the owner because the state owns it, right? How do you penalize for change of use?
The state does not own every underwater parcel.
Municipalities.
There are some municipalities that do have that portion as well, generally speaking, in general terms.
Okay, so what I have as friendly amendment motion is that part of the PA 490 process that there be an annual reporting of survey information from farmland and maritime landowners. Correct?
Census.
I'm sorry?
Can we call it a census?
That's his information.
Right, asking everybody, that's a census.
It's.
Anyway, whatever, leave it, yeah.
Sorry?
Don't worry about it.
Is there any other discussion as motion with our friendly amendments and everything? So I'll read it again. As part of the PA 490 process, that there be an annual reporting of survey information from farmland and maritime landowners. Any other discussion? Yes, Jim.
I want to go, so but I guess I'm a little nervous to vote on this, not having a full definition of survey. So like, what is going to be captured in that, And so I guess I'm a little hesitant to pull to move forward on this without having, and I get that this is a process and we're evolving it, but I'm afraid to vote in favor of it. And then I find out later that this survey is not what I envisioned when I made my vote today, I guess.
The discussion was the survey is what we're currently using, that survey. is the information. That's what we were discussing.
Is
I mean,
this-
that was the discussion here.
Is it a replacement of the 5-year that's going to appear? And then is it gonna be how long, right? Like, when I think about the current survey that kind of went amok and you got kicked out, no, I didn't do it because I didn't get it, but if you got kicked out because you said no lease, like, is this a 10-question survey? Is this a 25-question survey? Is this a 50-question survey? When we have farmers who lease thousands of acres, well, some of them are leasing upwards of thousands of acres through 50 different landowners, like, now are we asking a farmer to fill out a survey, or, you know, is it just the landowner who's going to be filling it out because that's who's receiving it? Like, I guess I'm a little nervous about the survey. What's exactly on the survey?
Most was a requirement on the landowner to do annual reporting that reflects, or census, whatever you want to call it, for the survey information adequate to populate the calculations need to be done to come up with 490 value. It's a simple concept, and there's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of pieces that we got to fill in, but it's just a matter of getting enough information so that we can make decisions.
It is a shift. Our current survey goes to farmers. This survey is going to landowners. So
no, the current survey goes to
landowners, which I also didn't get. So
Well,
I
that
just,
is 30-acre threshold. So.
I'm above that.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
This would solve that issue for you.
Other discussion? Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any opposed, raise your hand. 1, 2. Oh, that carries. Our next meeting, I mean, we still have land categories to do, and we want to go back to current practice stuff. And then at our next meeting, which is July 14th, currently scheduled 9:30 to 11:30. Do we feel you want more time? Do you want to do a longer meeting, or do you want to leave it at the 2 hours? We've got a couple land categories to do, and obviously anything else anyone wants to bring up. I know, Kim, you sent us something this morning. I did not have a chance to look at it, so I'm more than happy to put that on next week's agenda.
The format of that is more charrette oriented, where it is a bit more open conversation. And I think that really the categories and what are those data points really deserves to have discussion versus motion, discuss, vote, because there's such nuances in that. And I do believe that having a more a different format in how that is discussed would bring more clarity to those two very, very important critical topics.
Yeah, I'd like to recommend we keep today's format and do like a 9 to noon. Give us the time that might be needed for some of these discussion. And I'd rather have a longer meeting and shorten the whole process overall if it works that way, but I'd be comfortable with a 9 to noon meeting on the 14th.
Ella?
Just to clarify, so we're talking about land types, we're talking about caps, and we're talking about the methodology for the survey or census or report or however we want to say it. Things, because I do want to honor, I agree with Jenny. If we voted for a survey and it's trash, I'm going to be very disappointed in myself. Kim, does that capture too?
Yeah, I think, what I kind of preliminary sent out this morning was just sort of moving to more of a charrette format where we're discussing the categories, the data, what kind of data we're looking at. And then, of course, how does that ladder up to land values? How do we then take that and ladder it up to land values? And I think that starts to answer questions like, what is that cap? 20% is a random, right? But what is that? We can start to look at that. And also, I think really looking at what you sent to Brian earlier, which was, what's our maybe 30-year, let's look across the board and see, and really kind of identify what has changed. And I can kind of frame that out a bit more, Martin, if that makes sense, and send it to you and just get feedback on that.
It's up to the group of which way you want to handle
I mean,
it.
I could also send it out to the whole group and everyone can just chime in and say, hey, these are things that we need to add to this discussion. But I just think the format that we've been doing, it makes it a little difficult to really get into the granular details, which we still, as you pointed out, Jenny, really, we've just kind of gotten to.
I think some of that is, and thanks, Kevin, is some of that is the next step. It's like, okay, we've got through these recommendations. Now we've got to formulate some, a little more in depth than everything else. And that process may be easier if the group wants to do it that way, of doing the in-depth process once we kind of get through, this other process of finishing. We've got the tabled vote. We've got the few items left on here to, continue with and finish those up the first part of the meeting, and then kind of maybe hit into that second part. As we start working through the details on some of those. So are people fine with a 9 to 12 again? Consensus, okay. So we will, you'll get an update on the calendar. I don't remember if I sent the calendar invite out yet, but we'll do it 9 to noon on the 14th. Hopefully we'll verify the facility here and everything else. As I mentioned earlier, we did not have any comments received and no public comments signed up for today. So at 12:14, we will adjourn, and I thank everybody for your attendance and participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, this one just wrapped up. I can talk to you. Sorry.